All right, so we're going to get started, and we are going to get started with the roll call. So I'll just ask councillors ready for the roll call here. Over to you, Chris. Oh, I will mention too, Vice Chair Carr has just advised that she's likely unable to attend today's meeting. She may Zoom in later, but as of now, she's not able to attend. I'll pass it over to you to Chris to do the roll call.
Councillor Brockington. Here. Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Devine. Here. Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor King. Here. Councillor Luloff.
Good morning, Chris. Councillor
Tierney.
Here.
And Chair Menard.
Present.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I just want to start out by recognizing that this is the start of National Public Works Week. Obviously this highlights the invaluable role of our public works staff in our daily lives, including things like snow removal and waste management and the road work that goes on. It's a week to offer an opportunity to celebrate the many people who work in public works and who are dedicated to protecting and improving our quality of life. So thank you to all of the City of Ottawa workers. Wanted to start on that note. Also wanted to recognize that the meeting is taking place on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. Are there any declarations of interest this morning from members? Okay, seeing none. Confirmation of minutes, or the minutes of the Environment and Climate Change Committee of Tuesday, April 16th, 2024 confirmed. Thank you very much. So on our agenda today, we've got items that we have staff presentations for each of the items, and there is delegations for each of the items as well as a few on the first one and one. So we're going to hold all of those items and get right into it. So that first item is the multi-residential waste diversion strategy update. We'll start with the presentation and then the three speakers. So over to our great staff, Shelley and Nicole.
Good morning, Chair and members of committee. So today we're here to provide an update on the multi-residential waste diversion strategy, of which will provide a quick overview. And I will just stop talking for a moment until the presentation gets up, because I'll be on slide 6 by the time motor through. Perfect. Thank you so much. Great. So we're going to provide a quick overview of the whole strategy before diving into the report that's in front of us today. So next slide, please. In the spring of 2022, Council approved the multi-residential waste diversion strategy. The goal of this strategy is to increase waste diversion at multi-residential properties over a 5-year planning horizon. Development of the strategy considered factors that influence how residents and tenants use waste programs, challenges faced by property management staff in delivering and managing diversion programs, and the influence of provincial regulations, directions, and initiatives on waste programs. We took an evidence-based approach to develop a strategy that is based on a solid foundation of best practices, comprehensive industry research, and public and stakeholder engagement. It recognizes that there are many barriers and challenges to diversion in this sector, not unique to Ottawa, consistent across the industry. The Council approved strategy includes 5 project pillars. Number 1 is expanding organics diversion to all multi-residential properties. Number 2 is enhancing promotion and education. Number 3 is exploring pilots. Number 4 is dedicating and redesigning space for waste disposal programs. And the 5th pillar is driving change moving forward through the collection contract. When Council approved the strategy in 2022, they directed staff to return with an implementation plan for onboarding all multi-residential properties serviced by the city to an organics diversion program, including a detailed cost analysis for this implementation. Today's report focuses on Pillar 1 and Pillar 5, and I will say that work continues on Pillars 2, 3, and 4. Next slide, please. This report seeks receipt of the detailed cost analysis and implementation plan for the onboarding of all multi-residential properties serviced by the City of Ottawa to an organics diversion program. Additionally, the report seeks Council's receipt of the details for the next multi-residential collection contract commencing in Q2 2026, which includes enhancement to operations and collection efficiencies. I will now hand the presentation over to Nicole to get into the details behind the report's recommendations.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley, and good morning, members of committee. So we'll pop onto the next slide, please. So we'll do a little bit of context setting just as a reminder before diving into our recommended approach for onboarding green bins to the remaining properties that don't have a program in place. So as it exists today, the City of Ottawa provides waste management services to the multi-residential sector, and we provide services to about 2,300 properties, all of which have recycling programs in place, but just over half of those properties have a green bin program in place. So multi-residential properties are defined in the city's waste management bylaw as properties that have 6 or more residential units. And this can include apartment buildings, townhome complexes, garden townhomes. And multi-residential properties, they generally dispose of their garbage, their recycling, and organics in either large front-end load communal bins or carts. So the city provides waste management services to the majority of multi-residential properties in Ottawa. We estimate about 90%, but about 10% utilize private waste management services. You've likely heard us share before that multi-residential properties are regulated by the province as part of the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. And as part of these provincial requirements, they place the responsibility for waste management on property owners and managers. So the city has no statutory requirement to provide waste management services to the multi-residential sector, but we have council direction to do so. And this dates back to pre-amalgamation. In the City of Ottawa, we're not unique in that. About 80% of municipalities in Ontario service the multi-residential sector. So as you can see from the slide here, diversion rates are typically much lower in the multi-residential sector, and it's given many complexities and barriers that the multi-residential waste diversion strategy will be tackling. And of course, it's not unique to the City of Ottawa. We see this across the sector in Ontario, across Canada, and even internationally. So of course, hence the development of the multi-residential waste development strategy. And next slide, please. So for those remaining properties that currently do not have a green bin program in place, we are proposing to take a tiered approach. So as you can see on the slide here, it'll be a 4-tier approach, and our intent is to be onboarding about 260 properties per year over the next 4.5 years. So the first tier to be onboarded will be properties that currently receive regularly scheduled additional garbage collection. So for context, the multi-residential sector, similar to curbside households where we have an item limit in place, we have a set allocation for the number of units within a multi-residential property. But there are a number of properties that pay for additional garbage collection. So we are proposing to tackle those first. It's an opportunity to get them onboarded to the organics program and an opportunity for some of those facilities to also save money. Moving on to tier 2, we'll focus on smaller properties under 100 units that receive regular garbage collection, but they're not receiving additional collections. We anticipate this property stock to be easier to onboard compared to some of our larger properties, where a good percentage of our properties were built pre-1990, where recycling programs weren't in place. So there are a number of different space considerations. So tier 3 is when we will be tackling the larger property, so over 100 units. And then tier 4 is for properties with constraints that would prevent them from onboarding immediately. So for example, if we're identifying and working through tiers 1, tier 2, and tier 3 in a property, upon visit by one of our solid waste inspectors, we realize that they may benefit from some retrofits as an example. We'd be putting them into tier 4 to allow some additional time for property managers to make those changes in order to successfully onboard a green bin program. At the end of the day, this isn't a box checking exercise. We recognize that there are a number of different considerations that we need to contemplate to successfully roll out a program. So next slide, please. In terms of support for onboarding the organics program, a key piece of feedback that we did hear from the property management sector, but also a key piece through our literature review as well as best practices across the industry is that there are a number of different supports that are required to successfully implement a green bin program. So first and foremost, we have our solid waste inspectors, as well as an outreach team that will work closely with each property as part of the onboarding process. Even with complicated situations, our solid waste inspectors are usually able to come up with creative solutions to help properties get a program started. So based on industry research and best practices through the development of the strategy, promotion and education is most effective when levels of program awareness are low, but also when a program has recently been implemented. So market research that we undertook before developing the strategy identified that about 39% of residents living on our multi-residential properties fall within what we coin the disconnected market segment. So what that means is they do not divert much waste, and mainly because they have very little knowledge about waste diversion programs. So when council approved the strategy in 2022, we created an education and outreach program that will be in place until such time that all remaining properties are onboarded. They will help support both onboarding and promotion and education at properties that already have a green bin program in place. So it's twofold, supporting all new properties that are going to be onboarded, but supporting education at buildings that already have a program in place, especially given the transient nature within our multi-residential community. The outreach team will engage residents through door knocking. They'll be delivering kitchen catchers to every household, as well as materials and information about the green bin program and recycling programs, lobby booths, as well as virtual sessions. This team will also be critical in helping us analyze and track success of program rollout. So they will be responsible for conducting periodic visual waste audits to help us understand participation rates. And just one last note, of course, this program and the onboarding approach is based on best practices and successes we've seen in other municipalities who undertook similar approaches. For example, the City of Toronto and the City of Edmonton, who's also in the midst of rolling out mandatory organics program to their multi-residential properties. Next slide, please. In terms of the financial impact, so a little bit of context here. Solid waste services, our total operating budget in 2024 is $113.5 million. The total organics diversion program costs about $37.7 million. And we're estimating the cost to onboard the remaining just over 1,050 properties to the green bin program will be about $5.6 million over the next 4.5 years. So this includes the costs for organics collection, organics processing, the delivery of green bins and kitchen catchers, as well as education and outreach. So funding to support property onboarding in 2024 was approved by council as part of the 2024 budget. So there's no additional request for funding at this point. And approval for following years will also be sought through the annual budget process. And then on another note as well, the financial implications that you see here today have also been incorporated into the solid waste long-range financial plan, which will be tabled for committee and council consideration alongside the solid waste master plan next month. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Nicole. So the city's multi-residential collection contract. The current contract began in June 1st, 2020, and was set to expire on June 1st, 2025. Staff negotiated a one-year extension with the current contractor to continue collection of multi-residential properties until May 31st, 2026. In order to accommodate the Blue Box Produce program's transition period, my gosh, that's a mouthful, to individual producer responsibility. Specifically, the collection contract was extended from June 2nd, 2025 until December 31st, 2025 for all waste streams, and from January 1st, 2026 until May 31st, 2026 for garbage, organics, and bulky collections only. Note, just as a reminder, note under the Blue Box program, which for Ottawa includes both the blue and the black box materials, recycling will fully become the responsibility of producers of paper products and packaging as of January 1st, 2026. Ontario municipalities will no longer play a role in residential recycling collection and processing, and this waste stream will be eliminated from our collection contract. Further, producers under the Blue Box program will be responsible for providing recycling containers to residents across Ontario. As part of the solid waste multi-residential collection contract procurement, the city intends to implement a standard term collection contract, 7 + 2 one-year extension options, expected to begin June 1st, 2026. In preparation for the procurement of the next multi-residential collection contract, the city's solid waste team have reviewed the existing contract, completed municipal scans, and determined opportunities for contract optimization for implementation and to mitigate contract cost increases in the next collection contract. The 2026 multi-residential collection contract will be procured under a request for proposal that will be posted on Mercs for bid submissions very soon. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the city has implemented several changes for an efficient contract starting on June 1st, 2026. The following contract optimization options were identified to improve the efficiency of the contract oversight and to align with the council-approved draft solid waste master plan initiatives, specifically the waste diversion efforts at multi-residential properties. The first change to the collection contract involves front-end loading garbage container rentals. Currently, the city owns front-end loading garbage, fiber, GMP containers, and is responsible under the current contract to oversee the maintenance, replacement, and supply of additional container requests. The garbage FEL containers are leased to multi-residential properties, and the contractor is responsible for bin maintenance, repairs, repainting, and modifications of the city-owned containers, and also the recycling carts. Properties have the right to privately own garbage containers. It's important to note that currently nearly 50% of our multi-residential properties own their own garbage containers, and as of 2026, producers will be responsible for recycling containers to residents across Ontario, including our multi-residential buildings. This requirement creates an administrative and cost burden to the city. Follow-ups are required to confirm maintenance has been completed as needed by the contractor, and maintaining the bin inventory for new and replacement containers is costly for the city. As a result, the city is looking to eliminate FEL garbage container rental services as part of the next contract. To adapt this change, the city will work with property owners to negotiate the sale of these assets already in place and in use at multi-residential properties where possible. Removing the service from the collection contract will minimize anticipated contract cost increases, eliminating maintenance and repair services to be provided by the contractor. The second change to the 2026 multi-residential collection contract impacts the schedule for organics collection at multi-residential properties. Currently, waste streams are collected by the city's contractor on a 5-day collection schedule between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. If recycling and organics collection falls on a statutory holiday, like this week with Victoria Day, collection gets pushed to the next day. This typically requires processing facilities to open on Saturdays to accommodate waste collected as a result of these push weeks. For garbage collection, however, services are only pushed out if collections fall on Christmas Day or New Year's Day. In order to minimize the need for processing facilities to operate on Saturdays following weeks with statutory holidays, and for the staffing requirements of collection, and to support the greater rollout and anticipated increased participation in the Green Bin program, starting June 1st, 2026, the city will collect organics at multi-residential properties on statutory holidays as well as garbage. This will eliminate the need for collection services, staffing, and oversight on push day Saturdays, currently for organics only, following most statutory holidays. This will coincide with the collection schedule for garbage, which only experiences push weeks when Christmas Day and New Year's Day fall on a weekday. It's anticipated that this change will result in a benefit to collection and processing facilities, as they no longer need to staff operations on the Saturdays. Additionally, it will simplify collection services for properties with organics and garbage collection now abiding by the same schedule. The last item changed in the collection contract is the customer service agreement. A customer service agreement documents the details of service, including the quantity, size of containers, collection frequency, handling distances, property owner, amongst other things, and authorizes access to property. The CSA is a contract and must be completed for all multi-residential properties. The CSA is completed following an on-site visit by the contractor to the property before the start of the contract. It must be signed by both the contractor and the property owner, with a copy sent to the city. By having this agreement between the contractor and the property, it's a missed opportunity for the city to get multi-residential property owners' commitment to waste diversion. Based on an internal review, the city is seeking to bring these documents or records of service to be maintained in-house. Reasons for this change include it will ensure service details are kept up to date, will be able to include a requirement for the property owner to sign off on waste diversion commitments, and will reduce any liability concerns. Next slide, please. The following are the anticipated next steps following Council's receipt of the multi-residential waste diversion strategy report. So currently, we are working to determine the tiered approach for mandatory organics implementation. And we anticipate in Q3 2024, the multi-residential contract will be awarded. With any new contract, there'll be time and attention needed by city staff in order to prepare for the next contract. That work will take place between Q4 2024 and Q2 2026. We anticipate the new multi-residential contract will begin on June 1st, 2026. By Q4 2028, our tiered approach for mandatory organics implementation will be completed. So thank you for your time this morning, and we'll be happy to address any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm sure members will have questions. We do have some delegations. It's actually 4 delegations on this item. The first delegation who will ask to come up is Angela Keller-Herzog, along with a PowerPoint. She'll be presenting.
Okay, good morning. So it's wonderful to be here. And I think you all know me. I'm with Cafes, our local environmental network. We are delighted to see this agenda item here. I'm sure that PowerPoint will come up and we can start the clock then. I think that the mandatory strategy was effective in June 2022. So we have a lot of enthusiasm. We would have liked to see this here 2 years ago, but we are still enthusiastically welcoming the strategy today. So thank you to the staff. Next slide, please. Yes, and you know us, so next slide, please. So the overview of my presentation, I'm going to have a couple of bullets on context, and then I'm going to have 6 observations and questions and summarize with recommendations. Next slide, please. So in terms of the context, I think there's 3 big contextual areas. One is the greenhouse gases. We know that organics in landfill generate methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, but not all residents actually know this. We know that there's a lot of work to be done with climate literacy. We also know that the city of Ottawa is running out of trail road landfill space. So the desired outcome there is diversion. And thirdly, in terms of a sustainability analysis, we would like to see a more circular economy. So there, the desired outcome is a redesign of processes that we can use compost for actually back to local agriculture. That would be the circular concept in terms of dealing with organics. Next slide, please. So I need to keep moving here so I don't run out of time. So our first observation is, why can't we concentrate our effort and implement the strategy in 1 year? There's no actual in-depth or persuasive rationale provided in the staff report why we need to stretch this out over 4 years. The buildings obviously have had 2 years notice that there's a coming change, so it's not like they're being surprised, right? If anything, actually, I think it does reputational damage to the city for things to take such a long time, and when you do things really slowly, they also become more expensive. Next slide, please. I think that another thing that we would like to see in this strategy, if we're going to call it a strategy, is we'd like to see some targets and metrics in terms of KPIs. The units of success, we don't think should be this operational units of onboarded buildings, but I think it should be in terms of percentages and tons of organic waste diverted. And that those metrics and that data can then relate to the rest of the residuals management. Next slide, please. So the third point is that if we look at those metrics and the context, then actually work also needs to be done in terms of organics diversion on the already onboarded MURBs, because the staff report helpfully tells us that 70% of the food and organic waste in onboarded MURBs goes in the garbage. So that's like a huge low-hanging fruit. And we're hoping that the environmental education assistants and solid waste inspectors could be resourced to also visit those buildings who are low-hanging fruit. As I said, next slide, please. I'm wondering, I can't really see a clock here. Okay, anyway, I'll keep rocking. Resources for education and behavior change. I think that you've heard many presentations from Waste Watch Ottawa that compares municipalities, and we know that Ottawa really underspends in terms of education. And there's a lot more that could be done in terms of working with the community. I regularly hear from people that are asking me questions on why is it there's no green bin in my building. Next slide, please. In terms of the fifth point we have, in terms of building better and new buildings, I'm wondering, are there any zoning bylaw requirements? Is there a regulatory gap in terms of, given that site plan only applies to 10 units and bigger? So are we creating more problems for the future by not having a requirement for the space for organics management, which is identified as the leading barrier for not having this work in Ottawa right now? Next slide, please. Our last point pertains to budget. Obviously, if we were to accelerate this program, that would front end load more of the expense, but we think that the present value of cost would probably be lower and would just require reprofiling over time. We also have some questions. Okay.
Just ask you to wrap up.
If we move climate money to these objectives, what that looks like. And the last slide, please. So this is the list of recommendations that falls. Oh, sorry, one more. The last slide summarizes the recommendations falling out of the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your delegation. And Councillor King has a question.
Thank you, Chair. And I really want to thank cafes for all the work that they undertake. Really appreciate it, especially when you consider it's volunteer work. And, I think of last May 2023 when I attended a climate resiliency community dialogue in Vanier, and that was sponsored by several community associations in my ward, Linden Lee, Manor Park, Rockcliffe Park. In fact, I think it was all the community associations who came together to really share specific ideas that were emerging from the community. So I was just wondering if you could share some of those ideas that might have come out of that dialogue, specifically around multi-residential waste diversion. So I'm just curious, what do you think the city can do to work better with the community based on a lot of the dialogues that Cafe has undertaken with the community?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think that there are many local events that councillors are aware of. There's many eco fairs. There are biking events. There are stream cleanups, park cleanups. There's all kinds of places and times when people in the community who care about the environment and climate come together. And identifying those people, engaging with them and saying, hey, this is what the city is doing about the green bin. If you live in a multi-unit residential building, this is the program. And I think that all of that positive energy can be recruited by the city to help you with the implementation. So the city is, and I'm totally in favor of this, hiring these temporary educational assistants, but you can also just hire or engage with and talk to community volunteers. Now, to get that process of engagement going obviously requires some kind of a plan. But I'm sure that if there was a willingness to say, hey, we're going to put some sense or some effort on community engagement, we could figure out like some kind of implementable strategy that could really boost this green bin adoption, which the environmental community is like fully supportive.
I thank you for that, and I would agree. I know that many of the community associations in my ward have environment committees. I think of both Overbrook and Manor Park, and I know that they really enjoy going out and providing educational resources. So it's something that we would obviously encourage city staff to continue to do, to work with the environmental committees, with the community associations, and with other organizations, frankly, to get the word out about this initiative, because I think that we will have to do yeoman's work to get the word out, so that it's not a surprise to people. I had one other question. It was really just to allow you to elaborate around the circular economy and zero waste principles, since you only have so much time when you delegate, and I definitely like to hear more about those ideas and how they might interface with the strategy.
Thank you for that question, also very close to my heart. So in terms of the big architecture of the solid waste management master plan, there's a set of organizing priorities and principles and approaches, and that included a circular economy and zero waste approach. So the strategy that we're looking at here, it's one small piece of it, but the way it's presented is it's in a very small box, and it doesn't really explain at all. Like, it has no section that says, so what's the plan after you stick the waste in the green bin, right? There's no sense of where is it going. It just disappears once you put it in the green bin? Obviously not. So if you had a culture and a redesign that says, okay, how do we get to this zero waste circularity? Then you would need to unpack that. I think that Ottawa should have like a separate strategy, for example, for the dog waste. Other cities do much better, so that there can be a circularity there rather than it being a pollutant in terms of the plastic bags and the contaminants. And I think that ultimately, if we have organic waste, we should be able to bring it back into the soil. And I think that in Ottawa right now, there's an understanding that, oh, no, it's just like a big yucky mess, and like it needs to be like disappeared. And that is a culture change that we need. And I think that we ultimately cannot just continue to have this idea that we disappear waste. We need to manage it. And that's why philosophically that circular economy thing was put on top, but it needs to be implemented. It can't just be window dressing, right? And there's very concrete steps that can be done in terms of redesigning of processes. But the very first step is to start asking that question, like, well, where does it go? And this strategy, maybe to save you guys more 50 pages of reading, doesn't have that information. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I think you're right. Less is more. We hear that all the time. And in a scenario where we're really dealing with massive reduction in landfill space, I think we also have to look at zero waste being one of the maximal areas that we really attempt to achieve in. So I appreciate the input, the insight, and also the outreach that Cafes undertakes in the communities to really enrich our reflection in terms of policy making. So I really appreciate that, and thank you for your delegation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor King. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming out. as always. I am interested in the circular economy idea, and I'll ask staff about the possibilities of promoting that with local farms, et cetera. I think that gives people a visual of where their garbage is going or their compost is going. And I think that that's something that people need as a visual. Like you said, what happens after you dump it in that bin? And is it, why is it a good thing? So I think that's important. But in terms of events, et cetera, I put them on myself. We're going to have tables, teaching people about the importance of composting. But I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir, and that there's a whole bunch of people out there that just aren't in that loop. And the only way I can figure out to get to them is through kids, a good chunk of them, and through schools. So, and I'll ask about that, but I don't know if you've had any research on that, but, reaching out to younger people to, sometimes they teach their parents, and especially newcomers to Canada. There's a lot of people that aren't in tune with what's going on here. They're new to our city. I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh, for the question. That's something that I was thinking about when I was preparing, and when we had the Cafes Waste Caucus to discuss this presentation. OCDSB, the biggest school board that we have here in Ottawa, they have green bins in some of the schools, and there is some kind of a pilot program initiative that schools, if they want to, can sign up for. And there is a perception that, this is all a bunch of hassle, and there's like vermin, and can we really deal with this? And is this part of the employment contract of the, the people that maintain the facilities. So definitely there's some work needed. Like, again, there's all these little road bumps that if we want to create change, that there's another barrier. But the existence of this pilot program means that it is possible to break through. And I would say that the same thing is true actually of the community centers. Not all community centers in Ottawa have a green bin, but if residents are proactive and contact the city will make it happen. So through cafes, fairly recently, I had one of our members say hey, how come we don't have green bins at the community center? And I think some weeks later, they're going to have them. So step by step, we need to make these changes. One last thing on the circularity on the MURBs. I think what's very feasible is to have a community compost where, it's just like with a home compost, and you make some soil that you can use for your pollinator garden, or give as extra nutrition for the trees or whatever on the property. And that wouldn't be that hard to do.
Thank you. Appreciate all your work in the community. Thanks, Angela.
Okay.
We have one more question for you, Angela, and it's from Councillor Devine.
Hey, Angela, not so much a question as much as just a thank you, but that I will. And to hear that Cafes does all of this fine work as volunteers is very impressive. But I just wanted to mention that I will be asking staff questions about the extent to which we will engage the community on the education front, and I will also be asking questions about the timeline. I may not be as ambitious as your timeline, but I will be asking questions about that. So thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Devine. Thank you, Angela, for being here. We are going to move on now to John Dickey, Chair of the Eastern Ontario Landlord Organization. I think John is online.
Yes, good morning, Chair and committee members. Hold on. There we are. Thank you. So a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate being here by video. I have a few overarching comments to make. And then we'll respond to one of the suggestions that Angela just made with respect to the timeline. So my first sort of comment is to commend the excellent work that the city staff has done on this. in terms of consulting with the industry, in terms of the research, in terms of best practices, in terms of putting all that together in order to seek to move this important work forward effectively and cost effectively and in a manageable way that keeps people working in a cooperative and collaborative way. I find the solid waste staff really a delight to work with. And let me say that's not because they always agree with everything I suggest or ask for, but it's certainly because they invariably engage me, seem to listen to me, engage with me, and we have really good discussions that seem to me to enable us to reach win-win solutions. So they are terrific to deal with in that way. One of the major things that came from those discussions was this rather extensive education assistant program. And that is so important to get the messaging out to the tenants, because certainly one of the major concerns that rental housing providers have is we can't just snap our fingers and the tenants will do what they are supposed to do. One of the things we do is we manage a lot of tenant behavior, and this is one more thing which in one sense we have to manage. And it's extremely helpful to us and helpful to achieve a good result for the messages to be coming in many cases from the city, that this is something that the city needs you to do. This is something that the community needs you to do. This is not just something that your big bad landlord is telling you to do because they're bossy and they want to control your life. This is important for the community. And so that is extremely important in this. And that, of course, they're also educating rental housing providers, which is also essential and important. But it is this education piece that drives the timeline, because it takes the staff people to do that. And I mean, volunteers can be very helpful, but in many ways, this is difficult, messy work. And it needs to be done well. If it's not done well, that's bad or worse than not doing it at all. And it is the education piece to me that drives this timeline, because the city has done the onboarding that it's done on a voluntary basis. And I think, I could be wrong, but just roughly, they are anticipating working about twice as fast now that they're in the mandatory process, the obligatory process. And I would suggest to you that it would be unrealistic to expect to increase the speed by more than that. That $1.2 million a year budget that they're showing for the education, to do it properly at twice the speed would increase significantly. And moreover, it would be unfortunate for the city's employees, because at least at this rate, someone can be brought in as an EAA, trained up, gets experience, and then they still have 2 or 3 years more of a good job within the city. Whereas if you tried to speed it up, you'd spend all the time and effort training people, and then they wouldn't have a job for very long. So that would be a waste of the city's resources to train people up. And then the person would come in, have a good city job, and then, or at least a decent city job, and then lose that city job. So I would suggest to you that this timeline is right. It should not be any faster. I mean, I could see it being a little slower, especially for those properties that require the retrofits, but certainly not any faster. And if I could just say as a last point that EOLO agrees with the changes to the collection contract. Again, we were consulted about those. We went back and forth with the city staff, and on a number of occasions, we would have been willing to see other things, but those were where the staff landed, and we certainly support those changes as well. So thank you for hearing me.
Thanks very much for your delegation, John. I'm seeing a question from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, John, for coming out. Appreciate hearing from the landlords from their perspective. One of the suggestions that was raised by Angela was about new builds and designing them better so that they can take waste in, more efficiently, because they weren't set up that way. And we're talking about buildings built a long time ago. So I just wanted your comments on that in terms of retrofitting and having new builds, having better facilities.
Well, site plans are still to apply to buildings of over 10 units, so that will still be there. I would say developers are now, of course, conscious of the need to handle the multiple streams of waste. Developers 50 years ago didn't not provide for multiple streams of waste because they were stupid. They just didn't provide for multiple streams of waste because we didn't handle waste in multiple streams. So certainly for the larger buildings, the provision will be there. I would anticipate that most developers of smaller buildings would make some provision for multiple streams of waste. And the trade-off with not having site plans on the smaller buildings is to try to speed up and make more efficient housing development. And, that's the reason for removing that requirement for those smaller buildings. So it is a bit of a trade-off. You're taking, the provincial government has said you have to take a bit of a risk here, that the developers and the people who buy from developers will be conscious of the fact that there are multiple waste streams, and they will include a little bit more space than they used to include for the handling of waste. I think that's the rationale, and I would be, I for one, and I think our organization wouldn't want to see sort of a site plan for buildings under 10 units brought in by the back door.
Okay, thank you. I hope that it will be an efficient thing, because it's got to be everywhere. This isn't just here in Ottawa. We're talking about changing building codes, et cetera, probably across the province, if not the country. So
well, that's entirely possible, and certainly the city still has the control over building permits, and people are building buildings for people to use them. Again, there's almost a philosophical difference between some people want the city to control or the province to control everything, whereas we think that developers are trying to produce a building that investors want to buy, and investors want a building that will work.
okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thanks for being here, John. Our next delegation is Duncan Burry with Waste Watch Ottawa. Duncan's here in person.
Thanks, Chair and Committee. Why is this taking so long? That's the basic question I have. So 6.5 years, June 2022 to the fall Q4 of 2028, 6.5 years to roll out this program. That sounds like an inordinately long period of time to me. And I think that echoes some of the questions and that Angela Keller has just raised. So in the face of continuing concerns about trail road landfill, continuing concerns about methane, remembering that all those organics which are currently going into landfill are generating methane. The city does collect methane at the landfill site, but they don't get it all. And so, surely this should be a much higher priority. So my question is, why are we going to take 4 years to spend, $5.6 million? Why can we not spend that money in 2 years to advance this agenda? Because I think it's absolutely critical. And I think this council and the city needs to grab this and aggressively move it. And frankly, 6.5 years to roll this program out is just not acceptable, in my opinion. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Duncan. I know members will have questions for staff around a timeline, as some have mentioned. So appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next delegation is Ada Wara with Gentle Ways for Our Planet. Welcome. And you've got 5 minutes to address the committee.
Bonjour, good morning. I'm Aida Waraf, the founder and executive director of Gentle Ways for Our Planet. My second unofficial title is the Green Bin Queen. And this is my way of saying that I'm a great fan of the Green Bin program in our city. Our not-for-profit organization supports individuals in Ottawa with educational tools and opportunities to help protect the environment. We organized tree planting events with youth from cultural groups. Our last event was in Barhaven. We promote the Green Bin. In 2023, we participated in 10 community events where we promoted the Green Bin program. We promoted it online. And in our last project, for which we received a small grant from the city, we're encouraging restaurants to add more plant-based items on their menu. We're doing all this to help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and to promote environmental wellness. What I'm going to do here is to share with you what we learned over the past year and a half from working with property managers. And I have one recommendation. Our goal was to onboard as many buildings as possible through champions. You all know that there are many people, particularly tenants, who like to have the Green Bin in their buildings, but they haven't been successful in convincing their property managers to sign up. Our goal, as I said, is to onboard through those champions as many buildings as possible. Also, when buildings have already signed up, our goal was to increase participation. My building, for example, had signed up, but the volume of our diverted organics were very small, okay? And this is what we did. In total, we approached 8 property managers across Ottawa, Sandy Hill, Centertown, Billings Bridge, Montreal Road. There are tall buildings and condo boards of directors. In 2 of these buildings, the Green Bin was already in place. But after we presented some educational materials, we held kiosks in the lobby of those buildings, and after only 2 months, the volume of the Green Bin doubled. And I was surprised to see that some tenants, some residents in those buildings were not aware of the program and didn't know how to use the Green Bin. So raising awareness and educational programs are effective. The rest of the building, the Green Bin champions wrote to we provided communication tools. Actually, we developed a comprehensive guide to show the champions how to do it, how to approach property managers, board of directors, and how to hold the kiosk. So in the rest of the buildings, the 8 buildings, property managers told us, since the program is not mandatory, we're not going to do it. So as long as we don't have to do it, we won't do it. Nobody said we don't have space for it. In one case in Sandy Hill, they said we tried it a while ago, but it was too messy. Some tenants dropped some food scraps, and therefore we decided to stop it. So we've been hearing about our landfill reaching capacity 10 years from now if we don't change our waste management practices. So we all agree that diversion of organics is feasible, necessary, and effective way of prolonging the life of our landfill. Diverting organics as quickly as possible will also help reduce GHG emissions. Now, I read the strategy, the implementation plan, and I know that in your 4th tier buildings, people have to do some retrofits. But in general, I find the 4-year plan is way too long. And again, based on what I heard directly from property managers, if it becomes mandatory, they'll have to do it, and they will do it. There are many volunteers who are supremely committed to promoting this program. There are community organizations like us who are there to work with you We worked very, very well with Lindsay Webley when she was in charge. She moved on to something else, but we're eager and very, very committed to working with you to raise awareness, to educate. Even when people sign up, they still need to learn about it and to be engaged. So my recommendation is that the onboarding process for the Green Bin program be implemented faster. Again, I'm proposing 1 year, and we're here to help you rather than waiting for 4 years.
Thank you. Your time for your delegation. Appreciate that very much.
Yes.
I'm not seeing questions, but I do have a question for you, and just wanted to say thanks for all your work for volunteering to do this sort of thing in buildings. I wanted to know what your advice would be to either building owners or because I know when I knock on doors in high-rise buildings, it's always a top 2 or 3 issue. This one is getting the green bin in the building if they don't already have it. They want it in there. The residents in my ward in those taller buildings want it there. So what is it that we can do or say or how to educate in getting it? Obviously it's mandatory, and it's mandatory in other cities now too. But what's your advice, I guess, to get people to start to use the green bin once they have it? We heard another delegation talk about the fact that though some buildings have it, people aren't using it as much as we'd like. What can we do to make sure that people are utilizing the green bin and being educated on how this can help?
Yes, once it becomes mandatory and property managers know that it is expected of them, then the next step is to do what we did in 2 buildings very successfully, to hold kiosks in the lobbies of those buildings. Of course, you'd have to coordinate with the manager or condo board of directors, if it's a condominium, inform the residents about a kiosk and provide educational materials, speak with the residents, show them how to use it. I had to show actually somebody how to use it. It's like they held, and you were very good to us. You provided some free bins, those small bins. I had them on the kiosk. I showed actually some people how to use it and where to take it in the building. So this kind of engagement is very effective, we found, based on our experience.
Thank you for doing that work. I see Councillor Tierney also has a question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your advocacy and promotion of it.
My pleasure.
And I think one thing that I've done for many, many years since getting elected is there's a civics component that's tied to our school boards for grade 5 and 10. And I have the privilege of bringing a lot of the students or visiting their classes. And just so you know, it seems like more and more over the years, environmental related is becoming more of the topic all the time. So thank you again for your advocacy. And I think all 24 councillors plus the mayor also have a role in that. So I invite my colleagues to bring all the kiddos down to City Hall or visit their classrooms and share the message that we have to do better at some point. But thank you for coming out today.
Thank you. May I say one more thing?
Sure.
It's the other leg of our project was to work with schools, and we were successful in partnering with Canada School of Art. Again, the city gave us, they donated 2 green bins, which we took to the school camps during the summer, and the kids decorated 2 of those green bins. We had a grand project. I wanted to have a large number of those bins decorated and put in an exhibit in Ottawa. We were unsuccessful in implementing this vision, but that was another. There is no lack of wonderful ideas if we want to work together on this, and we're ready to help in many, many other ways. Yes.
Thank you again, and appreciate your delegation. So with that, we're now going to move on to questions of staff. Thank you. to questions of staff from committee members. So the floor is open, and first up I've got Councillor Devine. And Councillor Devine, I'll just mention the last time you were speaking, your mic was a little bit muffled, so I'm not sure if you're able to get closer or something, but we'll see how you sound when you come on here.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
We can.
All right, I'll do my best. Hey, thank you very much, Nicole and Shelley. One of the delegates said earlier that your team is a delight to work with, and I just want to concur. You make garbage fun to talk about with you. You have probably the toughest job, one of the toughest jobs in the city, and I really appreciate the work you do. What I want to do is I want to zero in on a couple of questions raised by staff pertaining to timeline, but then some other issues. And I want to recognize here that I think we have. I'm very appreciative of the goals and that you put forward, but yes, I am worried about the timeline. To a certain extent, it does feel, in light of the crisis that we all recognize, it does feel somewhat like taking a phased approach to putting out a house fire. And I think the opportunity we have is we have general public recognition of this crisis, and as we've heard from several delegates, a willingness to get involved and to act. So with regards to the 4-year timeline, I heard a few delegates make reference to accelerate that to 1 year. That would be quite ambitious, but can you speak a little to what is the rationale behind putting this timeline over 4 years? I know even from my non-expert eye, when I saw that timeline, it did feel lengthy. Can you speak to what are the factors that are causing that timeline?
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. So I think just re-emphasizing some of the things that you heard from Mr. Dickey, first and foremost, it's recognizing that a lot of the properties that we are now looking to onboard mandatory, these are the properties that we anticipate have the greatest challenges, especially as it relates to the physical infrastructure. A lot of the properties that have voluntarily onboarded to date have generally had fewer of those space considerations and concerns. So I think it's one thing, recognizing that it will take time for some of these properties. Again, a large stock of these properties were built pre-1990, pre the existence of recycling programs. So a lot of space consideration. This is not a checkbox exercise as well. So, just dropping off a green bin will not be successful in actually achieving diversion rates. So in developing the tiered approach, we did work extensively with the property management sector. So taking into consideration some of those different barriers and recognizing that in implementing a program, they want to do it right and to do it well so that we can encourage tenant participation. One of the things as well is we're looking to balance onboarding within our existing resource complement and recognizing too, because of the fact that diversion programs are funded on the tax base, we're wanting to be reasonable in terms of managing within property tax increases. So for those factors, that's why you're seeing a 4-year onboarding or recommended tiered process as outlined in the staff report.
If I understand that correctly, it's largely the buildings that will require that either pose challenges or that will require retrofits that will take the lengthiest amount of time. Does that mean, however, that within the buildings, the merge that we do not anticipate will be causing as much of a challenge, are we still aiming to have those lined up and ready to go as quickly as possible, or are those timelines perhaps generous as well?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So the intent here too, we do anticipate that there likely will be buildings that will be, once notification goes out, that they may be interested in onboarding earlier. So certainly we're not going to be discouraging them. We will be looking with properties, even if they're wanting to onboard outside of their tier, of course, managing within our existing resource complement. So certainly we will not be turning those opportunities away.
Thank you. One more question about timeline. So for your tier 4 merge, those properties with constraints that prevent them from onboarding immediately, do we have the capacity to, if for any of those buildings, if the constraint is that they need to do retrofits, do we have, forgive me if this was already communicated, but do we have the capacity to require those retrofits and or incentivize those retrofits?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So the multi-residential waste diversion strategy didn't contemplate incentives to retrofit, but we do anticipate, just seeing with the properties we've onboarded to date, our solid waste inspectors can be fairly creative in terms of setting up a program. So we don't anticipate there to be many cases that would require retrofits. And we will not know the exact number until we're out meeting with every single property. As members of council may recall, the changes to our last collection contract, we introduced cart-based collection, and we also moved green bin collection from the curb onto the property. So that has certainly facilitated and give us more tools to be able to be more creative in trying to avoid those retrofits.
Thank you. I've got one more question. This is about the environmental educational assistance. And of course, I certainly recognize that the educational component of this rollout is key. To echo Councillor King's comment earlier that your educational component has yeoman's work before it, and then to reflect the fact that many hands make light work, can you speak a little about how the city will engage partnerships with organizations like community resource centers or community associations or churches to help engage residents in that education? And then can you speak a little bit about the multilingual nature of this educational plan?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. So I think first and foremost, as you've seen from some of the delegates, certainly we were very grateful for the work that they're doing organically and naturally within their communities and continuing to look to work with them to provide them with materials to continue doing that. And I think in terms of the second piece, so we will continue to be working with them and seeing where we can coordinate efforts in being able to share that information more broadly across the community. One of the things, as a staff report mentions, the intent is this team will be in place throughout the transition once mandatory onboarding is complete, at such time that we'll revisit kind of that team. But one of the things we've seen other municipalities implement that we're looking to do is creating a volunteer ambassador-based program. So the City of Toronto, as an example, has seen great success with that. So seeing a natural transition to be able to find those champions within each of the buildings. So that's something we'd certainly be interested in working further with these community groups on.
Thank you. With regards to your environmental educational assistance team, how large will that team be?
Sorry, Councillor, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sorry. With regards to your outreach program, your environmental educational assistance, how large will that team be?
Thank you, Councillor. So we have 6 part-time educational assistants.
Thank you. I'll listen to my call on the debate. I may speak to you later about timeline or between now and the council meeting. But thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tierney, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, Nicole, it's hilarious because I think you were one of the first people I met when I started here at City Hall. And oddly enough, Maria McRae was leading the charge on environmental issues. I think Elmsmere Towers, we went in there and had a green bin. I did a photo op hopping out of a green bin, trying to get them in the high rises. The split trucks, all of the initiatives of biweekly garbage where, there was threats of it being left on our lawn. So there's a lot of progress made back then. And maybe you can enlighten me just a little bit on how we wanted to make that first attempt with apartment towers versus what we're going to do this time that's going to make it different.
Thank you, Councillor. And I vividly remember the jumping out of the green bin story. So certainly, the green bin program was implemented 2010, 2011 is when it was offered voluntarily to the multi-residential sector. So it's been since 2011 that we've had over half of properties onboarded voluntarily to the program. So certainly where this differs is recognizing that we've put a lot of effort into that voluntary onboarding. And we're kind of at that point now where in order to kind of transition, we know, or to have green bins in all properties, that it is requiring this mandatory requirement for making it a condition of service. So just dating back as well to 2022 is when council made it mandatory to become a condition of receiving waste management services from the City of Ottawa. So as of June 1st of 2022, that's where all new properties being built and onboarded to waste collection services are now required to have a green bin property in place. And even since, council's approval of the strategy and us bringing forward the tiered approach today, we've had over 270 properties on board to the program. And we've been continuing working with those properties who are interested in onboarding and recognizing kind of the shift and the change that's happening.
And that's amazing. And, I look at where we are coming from till now, and there were some questions about our timelines. I think it's a fair assessment that probably 2.5 years, a lot of our programming was stalled out due to COVID and kind of living. Is that a fair assessment?
That's fair, Councillor. And I think just also noting too, we've spent part of last year as well onboarding the education team. And we've been focusing, trialing, piloting different approaches to see what works within properties that already have green bin programs in place, to use that as the basis to make sure that we're successful rolling out in the future. And we've seen some great success. We've seen with that education in those buildings, over 90% increase in participation. And we've also seen a remarkable drop in contamination as well.
Great, thank you. And of course, my thoughts when it comes to multi-residential. We've been working very closely together. I know a lot of the answers, so it's kind of a tee up. It's just more about if we could talk about the timelines and the engagement with our CCCs, or our Carleton Condominium Corporations, their chock-a-block. This morning, I went out and I saw on one of the pads locally near us, 4 cat trees, a cat carry, a bloody mattress. OPS may want to look into that one, and a whole amount of garbage, which is always concerning. And I think that's one of our big target zones. Can we expand on just briefly what the timelines are, what the engagement will be with the condos? Because obviously policing it is almost impossible. So it's really going to come down to the property owner, I think, and getting a strategy in place that works for them.
Certainly, Councillor, thank you for that. And we're actually going to touch a little bit more on that exact issue with the common pads in the next presentation related to the 3-item limit. But to your point, we do have a recommendation to start working more closely with them and reporting back within the next year.
Great. And thank you for all your terrific work on this. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to you. And I just want to start off by saying, in addition to Public Works Week, it's also Paramedics Week. We had a ceremony outside this morning, and want to give a shout out to all of the people who work in the paramedics field. I think some of the frustration with the dates, the implementation date, is we have not been talking about this since 2022. We've been talking about this before I came onto council, and we're not splitting the atom. We're talking about how to collect organic waste. So although I support the staff recommendation and will be supporting receipt of this update today, I do understand why some people are frustrated by the period of time it is taking us to implement this program. But I must also acknowledge there are legitimate and real challenges in doing so that our staff have identified through their work. Some of the multi-unit facilities, I'm going to assume, will have to create centers outside of the physical structure of the building. Can you confirm that's the case? And how will this be done?
That is correct, Councillor. So there are certain cases where today those garbage and recycling bins are outside. Best practice is that you're locating all diversion bins with garbage all in one location for ease and convenience to residents. So that will all be established as our solid waste inspectors visit every single property as part of onboarding. They'll also be looking at opportunities, especially now that we have cart-based collection. Is there a possibility to move off that front end load, bringing carts into a waste garbage room if there is space?
I don't know if the introduction of green bins will increase challenges with rats or whether that organic waste is already going into a garbage bin, therefore it's already an issue, or whether that right now in some of these facilities is being contained within the building. But if we're adding green bins, those containers or bins are going to be outside. So are we projecting an increase of RAD issues because some green bins are now going to be outside? And, you know, I have visited properties, particularly outside of my ward, where all of the waste bins are outside. You know, there are issues or going to be issues specifically on rats. Is there anything that we're doing to inform and educating property owners or property managers about how to mitigate those concerns?
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. So I think first and foremost, you mentioned it just that organic material today is ending up in the garbage. What we do encourage property owners, and with that change that council implemented back in 2019 to allow plastic bags as liners within the green bin, that is something that a lot of property managers have taken advantage of, not only from reducing the yuck factor from the resident participation, but also trying to address some of those pests and issues. And a lot of property managers as it exists today do have a lot of the pest control measures in place.
Okay, I appreciate that. And certainly when I campaign, I see a lot of interesting things, but certainly we don't want to make issues in neighborhoods worse because of this introduction. When your report says we are making this program mandatory, what authority do we have to make it mandatory? And if there's non-compliance, you talk about some repercussions, particularly on page 26, but really, what tools do we actually have to ensure that everyone must participate in this program?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So as I opened in today's presentation, of course, one of the complexities, multi-residential properties are regulated by the province, where the property manager, as part of the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. So property managers are responsible for waste management collection. So as you may recall, some of the discussions back when we tabled the initial strategy and recommendation, where council has the legislative tool and ability is to make this a contract or a requirement and a condition of receiving waste management services from the City of Ottawa. So that is what we're moving forward with. In terms of the compliance means, as we're working through each of the tiers, at the end of each tier, if we have properties after multiple notices that refuse to onboard, they will receive notice that they will no longer be eligible to receive waste collection services from the City of Ottawa. We don't anticipate a lot of properties that will move off from city waste collection services to privatized. If I give the example of the City of Toronto, when they were rolling out mandatory organics diversion, they had 2,700 properties. They only had 10 properties that moved over to private sector services.
Finally, my last question is, I'm assuming you are in contact with your colleagues in other municipalities, and there may be some sort of various working groups at a provincial level. At the end of the day, what are the murmurs or reading tea leaves about making this a mandatory requirement by law through provincial legislation? At the end of the day, if we ultimately want to amend behavior or change behavior, that might be required. So what are we hearing as far as the province making things like recycling mandatory requirement, organic waste participation a mandatory requirement by law?
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. So as it exists today, under provincial regulation, recycling is a regulated requirement. Also under the resource recovery and circular economy strategy, there is policy direction making it a requirement for all multi-residential properties to have a green bin program in place. So that is a requirement. As of 2025, they also have diversion targets that each of the property managers or each of the property owners are required to meet. So what we're doing here as the City of Ottawa is providing that opportunity in that program for property owners in order to meet their regulated requirements.
So just as a follow-up before I think in your introduction, you talk about the amount of waste that is collected that could be diverted, which I assume is recyclables plus organic waste, that is now going to the landfill. So for facilities that are not recycling, despite it being mandatory, what are the repercussions in that case? Is bylaw speaking to these facilities, or how are we holding multi-unit buildings accountable if they're not particularly recycling?
So in terms of the recycling requirement, that is regulated by the province. So they have the ability to enforce. So it's not something that the city enforce, that is enforced by the province of Ontario. But certainly we have an interest as a municipality to ensure that residents are recycling. So in addition to, we have a strong focus, of course, on organics diversion as part of this program. Our education assistants will also be using that opportunity to enhance all education when it comes to waste reduction diversion, including recycling, our blue and our black box participation in those programs as well.
Thanks very much, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to staff. I know you've worked really hard on this. If you don't mind, I'm also going to give a shout out to the community members here like Waste Watch and Cafes and others who have been working on these issues for many, many years, and they are our conscience, and I appreciate all the work they've done. Their questions of, why so long? They've been having to speak up for all these years. So I appreciate their efforts because frankly, they're our conscience, and we're getting there, even if it's taking longer than we expected. So appreciate it. I guess some of it's been talked about with Councillor Brockington, but it's sort of about the carrot or stick kind of approach of getting people to compost. It's the same as recycling, the same issue. And I just want your comments on that because, when do we have to intervene when people are, just not participating? And it could be landlords, it could be tenants, but just the overall process of how we go after those last ones. It's kind of reminds me of things that we've done in the past, like just getting people to pick up dog poop, like took years for people to get that in their conscience that that's absolutely essential, But so just wanted your comments.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think first and foremost, one of the biggest challenges that we have within this sector is the issue of anonymity. It makes it very difficult for us to understand what units and what tenants and residents are participating. But certainly, I think just going back to, again, some of that market research that we had undertaken, where we have about 39% of individuals living within multi-residential buildings, they don't divert much because they do not know much about it. So we know, while we have been focusing on education and promotion, we know this is an opportunity to do more and to do better. So hence that enhanced investment in outreach and utilizing those best practices from other municipalities being very important moving forward. And certainly, as you saw throughout the report, but also in the original multi-residential waste diversion strategy, we've identified a number of different key performance indicators that we will be monitoring, from diversion, from building participation, as well as waste audits. So we're going to be using all of those different tools in order to assess performance, and certainly we will be reporting back to council on the success, and also if we're not seeing that level of uptake, opportunities for what we consider moving kind of beyond what we're proposing as part of the multi-residential diversion strategy to date.
I was wondering, thank you. I was wondering if we can give a shout out to, stars, the star buildings, ordinary buildings that are just doing magnificently well, like just featuring them as an example that it can be done, when it's not obvious that they were built for this kind of process, and just give a special shout out to them. I'm sure the landlord wouldn't mind, or the building owner wouldn't mind, but I think it would help. Just they're like, oh, it can be done. It's not impossible, because I remember going door to door in 2018 and people were asking me, I'd really love a green bin program in my building. And it just seemed a million miles away. So we are getting there. But if we sort of give good examples, I think that would be helpful. So people can see, yes, this is possible. So it's not an impossible task. The other suggestion about just promoting the circular economy with the compost being used for local farms. I don't know if that's the case. And it just strikes me that it's a good visual for people to know that when they're doing this, something good is going to happen.
So thank you, Councillor. That's a great point. And certainly we've been trying to promote, we have on the ottawa.ca website, a composting video, which basically helps to narrate the story of what happens when the material goes from the bin and some of the uses. And so as Nicole mentioned, through some of the communication, it's really pushing out those pieces as well as pushing out those pieces in different languages so that people whose first language is in English or French have an understanding and appreciation for what this program is all about and what some of those benefits might be.
I think that would be great in a place like Bayshore where you've got a lot of newcomers coming in and with families. And, you know, again, I'd like to see going into schools and promoting it. Happy to do it myself. But it's I think it's getting to those kids where they're coming in and being a good example to the parents. I don't know if you've thought about that one.
Absolutely, Councillor, and thank you for that point. And we were actually just recently out with our education assistants within the Bayshore area, and they had some very successful outreach within that area. In terms of education, so certainly we do have a package. We actively work with schools, and where we can within our existing staffing, we do provide presentations at schools. One of the things we've also been doing, we've had a member of our team as recently as last week who had been meeting with the school boards, recognizing the opportunity to enhance some of their curriculum. In some circumstances, we have cases where we have, you know, the policies in place that conflict a little bit, bringing your food and organic waste into the home. So this is an opportunity for us to look at enhancing curriculum as well.
That's great news. Thank you. Keep me posted. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Curry, please.
Thank you very much. I want to just go back to this concept of the province. We don't have to do this. The province has mandated this, but it's not our job. So given that, so other municipalities do it. We've been doing it for a long time. Did you give some thought to us not doing it at all?
Councillor, if I could go back from our last term of council, when the direction for the wasteland was set, it was council's direction at that time to continuing providing services to the multi-residential waste.
Yeah, fair enough. But did you consider not doing it at all and telling us why?
No, we have not, Councillor.
You're just doing what you're told and that's that. Well, I mean, I guess I would have preferred that there be some analysis of that, what that actually looks like. Because if it is something that the province is mandating that municipalities are doing, fair enough that we do it because it's a good thing to do, but we don't have to do it. And it would be good for councillors to be able to see, you know, exactly, we see the budget numbers, how much it costs us, but what else could happen? We could say to the province, and have we never said to the province, sure, we'll continue to do it, but you have to pay for it. Have we tried that?
Not exactly that, Councillor, no.
Is there something else we've done?
We've done a lot of advocacy work focusing on changes to provincial regulations to enhance diversion within this sector.
Okay. Given what we are doing, you know, this 4 days push day, I know this isn't totally, but you did talk about in your presentation that we're not going to have that push day to Saturday and that, you know, we're bringing this other component in-house. What are the savings to the city for these different initiatives?
Council, we won't know specifically until we have the results of the RFP.
Okay, but has someone done a business case though to see that this would be saving us some money by doing these things that you're recommending?
We'll get back to you, Councillor, on that piece.
I'm just wondering if there's been any analysis of the environmental impact of just having more trucks on the road. Yes, we have less methane being produced, but have we also done the analysis to say, well, if we have fewer trucks on the road now, but we put more trucks on the road to do the multi-residential, what the environmental impact is of that?
So we've not done a full environmental assessment impact of completely removing service to the multi-residential sector, Councillor. But as part of, as we do look at new collection contracts, we do look at the environmental impact and trying to reduce the amount of trucks on the road as part of our contracted services.
Okay, we'll get that data at some point, what the analysis is.
As part of the RFP process, the vendors that are going to be bidding will be providing opportunities of how they're going to reduce their environmental footprint. So that'll be part of the analysis as part of looking at the entire package when that RFP comes back.
Okay, for sure, for them to reduce their environmental footprint, but what about us as a whole city? You know, we have methane potentially being reduced, but we have more trucks on the road. We have the province taking over some of the blue box stuff, but we don't know how many trucks that will mean. We have 4 days instead of going to Saturday. Is there sort of an analysis of how much greenhouse gas emissions we're producing by doing all this recycling?
So sorry, Councillor, can you just repeat the question? The greenhouse gas analysis of recycling programs?
Yeah, and we're doing more in terms of the composting, multi-residential. And if we wanted to say now start doing more restaurants, is there an analysis of that?
So Councillor, as part of the solid waste master plan, we did extensive greenhouse gas analysis. So certainly something I can follow up with you on. And just for context too, for the organics program for the multi-residential collection contract, we have 2 vehicles servicing organics across the city.
Okay, I think it would be interesting for us to get that kind of data. I just have a couple more questions. Councillor King's after me if he wants to go ahead, but.
You still got time, Councillor.
Okay, I wanted to ask about the idea that we would have the dog feces or dog poop bins and the segregation of that. Was that contemplated?
So Councillor, there was an extensive business case that was done back in 2018 when council made the decision to accept dog waste in the green bin. And I can certainly follow up with that as well.
Okay, but in this case, there's been no additional ideas that we would have a separate bin just for dog waste, because that's also at multi-residential. So we're just saying we would continue to just have it in with the compost and not separated even with this added bit.
No specific analysis as part of this project. Again, going back to council direction to expand the green bin program to accept dog waste. So that is where dog waste we're able to place it within the green bin.
Okay, I'll just have one more question. In terms of revenue generation from any of our programs, is there any analysis or a report that's specifically on how the city could generate revenue from any of this?
So as part of the solid waste master plan, Councillor, a lot of work was done to look at revenue generation opportunities. So certainly we will be presenting those alongside the long range financial plan when the solid waste master plan is presented next month.
Okay, so like in terms of selling compost to farms, to residents, to landscapers?
Yes, Councillor.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. I know that in the report, there was a focus on eliminating the front-end loading garbage container program. I'm just wondering, do we have estimates of the cost savings from the elimination of that program?
We'll get back to you with that, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I know some of those are detailed questions too on the specific operations of those bins. And I know we've got, obviously some of the questions from other councillors around the dog waste piece in green bins. I know we did have a pilot for a brief period of time in some parks where they had separate bins, but that was before they started accepting the waste in the green bin. So those programs kind of got phased out, but there was definitely some parks that had a separate bin just for dog waste that was identified for dog waste in the city. I think the biggest provincial change we have coming is IPR. That's a huge piece of work. And I know there's been a lot of advocacy and push for the province to make sure that we get it right for Ottawa, even as simple as things like collection on the same day. Because right now you got your collection all on the same day. Well, there is a chance that the province might put something in where the collector is coming on a different day. So all of a sudden you got two different collection times, 2 different trucks on 2 different days. And that's not reasonable for our residents. So I know staff have pushed very hard in working with the province to make sure that that's taken care of and then also paid for too, because this is not supposed to bring in extra funds for us. We're supposed to have a marginal cost savings, but it evens out when it comes to the actual work that's dedicated to it. So it's a I guess cost neutral is what we've been told on that part of things. I do think it would be interesting to see, and I did ask this question too of staff before about the diversion into landfill, how much that might save, right? Obviously landfill life is expensive. And so if there is a new diversion from a lot of multi-residential, helpful to know, how much we'll save over time. Obviously there's a one-time cost to get people onto the program. And then hopefully that diversion does help us into the future for, for our programs. I did want to just ask a question of staff too around the timeline, because I think we are getting a lot of properties on those first couple of tiers. So if there is like a rough percentage that we might have by, say, the end of this term, by the end of 2026, how many multi-residential properties that we're currently servicing do you anticipate we'll have on board? I know there's some that are really tough, but is there the ones that we're trying to get on board in the next couple of years? Do you have a percentage or a rough figure that you could give us?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. So it would be about 80 to 85% of all multi-residential properties that we would anticipate having onboarded by the end of 2026.
Okay, that is helpful, and I think obviously focusing there is great. There is a big demand from residents for this, so I know that they'll be happy to be able to put that type of waste into the agreement. There was a question from one of the delegates around existing multi-residential buildings that already have the green bin service, and that there's still some people that aren't using it. So what are we educating those buildings as well? I know we've got the educational assistance going out to the newer buildings we're trying to onboard, but the older buildings that already have it, that we want them to increase diversion. What's happening with those?
Thank you, Chair, for your question. So the educational assistance will focus on both. So onboarding new properties, but also returning to properties that have a program in place today and providing information and education on the program as well. And they've also been working extensively over the past year on just that.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you for that. So that's all the questions I have. Any other questions from committee or comments anyone wants to make? Really good round of questions and comments today. Okay, so with that then, there are report recommendations. So are the recommendations carried? And the report received overall? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much to our staff team and our delegates that came up for this item. The next item we have up is not a small item either. It's the Curbside Waste Diversion Policy and Implementation Plan and Operational Readiness Update. So I'll give staff a minute to turn over here and get a PowerPoint ready, and we'll jump into that.
Okay, we're still here. Thank you so much for joining us for part two. So today we're going to discuss the Curbside Waste Diversion Policy Implementation Plans. So with me are Nicole Hoover-Bianash from Solid Waste Services and Ghislaine Lamotte from the Public Information and Media Relations team. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, last June, Council approved changing the curbside garbage rate set out limit from 6 to 3 items. Staff were provided direction to explore leveraging the administration of the existing Yellow Bag program for small businesses to allow for households requiring periodic flexibility throughout the year to set out waste above the limit. So for example, move-ins, move-outs, a death in the family, or a special occasion, where waste generation rates may be higher than usual. Additionally, staff were directed to provide exemption options for agricultural properties with residential homes who receive curbside collection services, considering they do set out types of unavoidable waste related to farming operations. Direction was provided to expand the special considerations program to include non-hazardous medical waste. Direction to staff was provided to ensure that an equity lens is applied to the program rollout and use of data to target public education measures at communities where there's currently a lower participation rate in diversion programs. And lastly, direction was provided to undertake an independent third-party review to verify the data used to inform the development of the city's curbside waste diversion policy recommendation. Next slide, please. So building on the refresher, the average number of garbage items set out by curbside residents is 2.1 items, based on a set out study undertaken in the fall of 2022. The current item limit is 6. Approximately 85% of residents are already complying with the new 3 item set out limit, meaning approximately 15% of households will need to adjust waste set out habits and increase diversion and waste reduction in order to comply. Next slide, please. Considering the direction provided to staff, today's report recommendations are the following. Receive an update on the citywide communication and engagement plan and operational readiness plan in advance of the firm 3-item garbage limit being implemented on Monday, September 30th of this year. Approve leveraging the administration of the Yellow Bag program to accommodate households exceeding 3 items on any given garbage collection week, based on direction from council and following consultation with the Solid Waste Planning Council Sponsors Group. Direct staff to consult with property owners and delegates to explore tailored approaches to mitigate enforcement challenges faced by collection staff for properties with common pad collection and properties with 2 or more units receiving curbside waste collection services, and delegate the authority to staff to take the steps necessary to pilot tailored approaches with willing owners, as outlined in the report, and report back to council on progress in 2025. And receive the results of the third-party review of data used to inform the curbside waste diversion policy report. And with that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Ghislain to provide an overview of the communications and outreach plans.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And then, so I'll be presenting the next 3 slides, and we'll start with the next one right now, please. So for this slide, it's really identifying who the target audience is. For this project, we have all residents receiving curbside garbage collection, residents living in areas with lower waste diversion rates, owners and operators of properties eligible to participate in agricultural programs, and then residents whose first language is neither French or English. And the reason for that particular item is because we want to make sure we're reaching as many residents as we can in Ottawa. Now, every aspect of the campaign is going to be informed by the data and insight from the previous market research. We had done extensive market research back in 2018 and 2019, and again in 2021. And that research identified distinct audience segments based on attitudes and knowledge about waste diversion in Ottawa. So we took that information and were able to develop the communications plan based on that. I'll move on to the next slide, please. What you see on the screen here is the 4 phases for the communications and engagement plan. The first phase is the pre-implementation phase, which is from June of last year to June this year. Phase 2 is the informational phase, which is from May to October. Phase 3 is the waste diversion education from June 2024 to March of next year. And phase 4 is the reminder phase, which is really from November 2024 to February 2025. In terms of the first phase, the intention is to make the solid waste programs more visible to residents ahead of the launch of the citywide campaign. It includes communication materials to promote the waste collection calendar, tips on how to sort your waste, how to obtain a green bin, promoting circular economy events like the repair workshops that just took place recently that were quite successful, and other solid waste programs. This also includes the communications that took place back in June of last year, the committee debate and the council debate for the 3-item limits, and obviously the communications that have come out of this committee and then council next week. In terms of phase 2, the informational phase, this phase starts 4 months prior to the start of the service change. What we're trying to do here is really to ensure the curbside residents are aware of the program changes, which includes instructions for proper set out, the number of items or containers, the size and weight limits, how to register for the expanded special considerations program, and the agricultural exemptions. The tactics will include a mail out to every single curbside resident, We're going to be preparing kits for counselors. There'll be information videos. There'll be detailed information on ottawa.ca. Be participating in media interviews, social media. There'll be paid advertising, which will include targeted ads in multiple languages. It's important to note here that the mail out go in early September, so about 1 month before the change, once people are back from their vacation. But there will be some communications throughout the, starting in June and going out throughout the summer. In phase 3, with the waste diversion education phase, this phase is actually quite similar to phase 1, where we're continuing to make the city solid waste programs more visible to residents. It includes the promotion of the blue, the black, and the green bins, the hazardous waste depots, the take it back programs, the waste diversion tools and resources that exist for residents. And there'll also be a focus on illegal dumping here. On phase 4, which is the reminder, so after the program is started, there'll be continued placement on city's promotional tools, and there'll be paid advertising. And our communications will be adapted as required based on residents' participation in the program. I'll move to the next slide, please. An important component of the communication plan is the targeted outreach. So here, Public Works will be hiring what we're calling Curbside Education Ambassadors, similar to the concept from a few years ago when they hired the Green Bin Brigade. Some of you might remember when we introduced plastic bags with the Green Bin, there was an outreach team that was hired that went met with residents to have a conversation with them, and it was quite a popular program, so we decided to bring that back. They will provide door-to-door knocking and education to support residents and encourage participation in diversion programs with targeted support in low diversion neighborhoods. Outreach will take place at various events in the communities. Presentations will also be available in schools, with community groups, equity deserving groups, as per the council directive that we have received. And further, the targeted outreach will also include communications materials and educational videos that will be captioned in multiple languages. I'll now pass it over to Nicole.
Great, thank you, Ghislain. So similar to the communications and outreach strategy, we have numerous components to operational readiness that we'll be walking through on the next few slides. So actually, next slide, please. We'll be honing in and focusing on the opportunities to offer flexibility to the firm item limit for residents, as well as strategies to mitigate operational challenges. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, just linking back to Council's direction to look at the opportunity to leverage the administration of the existing Yellow Bag program for small businesses to offer flexibility for residents to set out additional waste. It certainly is feasible. And we believe it can be done within existing resources, which will be something that should council approve the staff recommendation, we will revisit 1 year once we actually have a good understanding of program participation and actual sales. Bags would continue to be sold in 4 packs for $17.60, so about $4.40 per bag. Just for context, this is based on full cost recovery for the collection, landfilling, as well as program administration and the price of the actual bag itself. And this is per pricing approved by council in the 2024 budget. So today, yellow bags are sold in all 7 client service centers, as well as 10 home hardwares and 1 BMR. So as you would have seen within the staff report, there are some gaps across the city where some wards do not have a retail location. So if council does approve utilizing this program, we would look to finalize an agreement with Recreation, Cultural and Facilities Services. We've been exploring an opportunity to sell bags at those facilities in those locations where there are gaps across the city today. And if we're unable to finalize those agreements, we would be looking at expanding to additional retailers. We did explore libraries as sales location option, but they were deemed unfeasible by the Ottawa Public Libraries. They're not in the business of cash handling and sales. So staff are certainly supportive of a solution being provided to residents requiring flexibility above the 3-item limit. So for those instances where it's required, such as move-ins, move-outs, family deaths after holidays and celebrations, when we typically see waste generation being higher than the average week. This also aligns with feedback shared through community engagement in 2021. It's just a reminder, we had over 20,000 residents participate in that engagement series. So certainly the highest level that we've seen on waste-related projects. And this recommendation was also informed by input provided by our Solid Waste Planning Council Sponsors Group when we met with them on April 29th. Next slide, please. So in terms of the special considerations program expansion, so for context, this program has been in place since 2012 when the city transitioned to biweekly garbage collection. It allows registered households to set out diapers and incontinence products on the off week of garbage collection. And as per council approved motion, we will be expanding the program to include additional unavoidable home healthcare waste, such as what's listed on the slide here. And the one bag limit will still apply. However, we recognize there may be some unique circumstances for some households that will be handled on a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So in terms of the agriculture exemption policy, as you'll recall, council did direct staff and delegated authority to staff to develop an exemption process. We have about just under 1,300 agriculture properties with residential homes that receive curbside waste collection services from the city. So council acknowledged when directing staff that certainly there are some unique factors related to these agriculture operations that generate unavoidable waste that can't be recycled, such as bale wrap, feed bags, and packaging material. To help inform an exemption policy, we did survey. We mailed out a survey to all of these properties. Waste generated by season was among the most relevant factors for additional unavoidable waste volume, with the spring being the highest. So it's based on this feedback that we are recommending unlimited, or these properties be able to set out unlimited amount of unavoidable waste during the spring farming season. So between April 1st and May 31st of each year. And recognizing as part of the policy, we're wanting to balance ensuring participation in recycling programs. Collection will be dependent on participation in waste diversion programs. Residential farms will also continue to be able to dispose of waste free of charge at Trail Road, which is current council policy. And we will also, as part of updates to our Take It Back program in the future, we'll be looking at opportunities to partner with industry partners to take back materials, so reducing the amount of waste going to landfill. Next slide, please. So in terms of rolling out the policy and ensuring residents have ample time to adjust their disposal and sorting habits, as Ghislain had walked through, we have a comprehensive 4-month communications and outreach plan in the lead up to the policy change. But we also recommend, based on best practice from other municipalities, that we have a transition period for curbside residents as it relates to enforcement. So we are recommending a graduated approach to enforcement of the policy. So with the new policy being in place as of September 30th, for the following month, the month of October, we're recommending that all garbage items at the curb continue to be collected, even if the limit is being exceeded. But this is where a courtesy tag will be left at the household, and we'll be tracking that information. In November, for households exceeding the 3-item garbage limit, collection staffs will continue to record and leave that courtesy tag. That courtesy tag will include information about how to participate in diversion programs and then get access to, or to order green bin and recycling bins. And then December is when our regular enforcement approach will begin. So only 3 garbage items will be collected, and the courtesy tag affixed to the garbage items that are left behind. So our collection operators will continue to document cases of improper set out, and this will escalate for review and follow up by a solid waste inspector, especially for those cases if we're noticing repeat households that continue to set out above the 3-item limit. Next slide, please. So in terms of illegal dumping, we know it exists today, and we know this is a concern heavily held by council. So we will be making tweaks to how we monitor to improve efficiency and enhance response time during program implementation. So as part of the 2024 budget, council approved 2 temporary resources to support monitoring illegal dumping in parks throughout the transition period. We'll be using this as a pilot of sorts. And funding was also approved for 2 additional temporary resources for bylaw services to help support and address the anticipated increase in illegal dumping on private property. Our parks, roads, and bylaw staff, they're going to continue to monitor. Of course, they are out on our streets every single day. And we've been using data insights from that they've been gathering from the past year to develop essentially hotspot maps. So we have a good understanding of the different hotspots across the city that we'll be more proactively monitoring. And Ghislaine touched on it very briefly, but as part of the communications campaign, we will have a detailed campaign focused on illegal dumping awareness with the intent to raise awareness around the economic, the environmental, and the health risks of illegal dumping, complemented with that call to action. So providing residents with information on what they can do if they come across or they directly see instances of illegal dumping. Next slide, please. And this piece here, this speaks to Councillor Tierney, the questions that you were raising as part of the last presentation. But on our curbside collection contract, we do service some multi-unit properties. So generally properties between 2 and 6 units. We also service a number of larger multi-unit properties that have common paths on where they dispose of waste. And these traditionally couldn't be served under our multi-residential collection contract due to space considerations. They make up about 17% of units serviced on our curbside collection contract. So historically, these properties have presented challenges for our collection staff with a firm item limit policy. And this is really because it's difficult for our collection contractors to be able to know if you're pulling up to a 6-plex and you're collecting garbage, well, how many units are in there and 3 times how many units. So in the short term, we are proposing to enhance our outreach and communications directly with these property managers, tailoring communications, and instances with proper setouts at these properties will be managed on a case-by-case basis. So we have a pretty good understanding from our frontline operations today where some of these problematic locations are. So we'll be enhancing our monitoring and our outreach within these communities. So that's the short term. The longer term, through this report, we are seeking a direction from council to delegate the authority to staff to be working with the property managers and condominium boards to explore and pilot tailored approaches with willing owners and reporting back to council with on progress next year. So we've been fairly successful to date in transitioning some of these properties over to our cart-based collection system on the multi-residential collection contract, but we know it might not be a suitable approach for every single property. So very similar to the approach we're taking with the multi-residential waste diversion strategy, it's working with each of these individual properties to understand the unique circumstances. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, as Ghislaine had mentioned, so upon council approval of the report, May 30th will be the day that we begin our citywide communications campaign. That's when councillor kits, toolkits will be distributed to each of your offices. And then September 30th will be when the new 3-item limit policy is in place. November, from September 30th to November 29th is when we have the gradual 3 garbage item limit policy or will be implemented and we'll have the graduated approach to enforcement. December 2nd will be when the new garbage policy is fully enforced. And Q2 of next year will be our first season for agriculture exemption being applied, and staff will report back to council on those mitigation options for enforcing the 3-item limit at multi-unit locations. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. It's appreciated. There is one delegation for this item, so I'll just ask John Dickey to come up again.
Yes.
John, you're with us. Thank you for staying with us, and you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to speak to this item primarily to remind people on the committee that a number of units on curbside collection are in fact occupied by renters. But I see the staff report has already addressed that. noting the 17% figure for multi-unit properties. Now that would include in some cases condominiums, so owners in a group setting, but in numerous other cases, it includes properties that are occupied by renters. So that's already been addressed. And certainly I can convey to the committee that, and EOLO, as you know, most of our members own and operate apartment towers, but some own and operate row houses, and certainly a number of our members also own and operate smaller complexes. And certainly we would be willing to work with city staff on these issues and on techniques to address this common pad problem. I had a few ideas as I was listening to staff go through this report. So again, I commend staff for the thoroughness of proceeding with this. I also think we can provide some useful input on the use of the yellow bag program, and whether that there was at one point talk of making a certain amount of those bags used, but I see this is meant to be a purchase by the individual user. So that will probably be, then by owners, be left up to the tenant who needs to put out additional solid waste, residual garbage at a certain point, can then go and purchase these tags. But owners may be involved in that when they need to clear out units that have been vacated. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And when that happens, I'm sure that's one of the reasons in which excess garbage is generated. So in any event, EOLO is happy to work with city staff on these issues to the good of the community in the city of Ottawa. And thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for that presentation and for your work with other community members and our staff team. I'll then just move to questions of committee and comments from committee. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To staff, can you remind us of the volumes of each of the 3 bins that will be allowed under the new regime?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So 140 liters per bin is the maximum.
Okay, wonderful. And the weight, 33 pounds, right?
That is correct, Councillor.
Okay, great. And just for clarity, a single residence with 3 apartments or a rooming house, that's going to be an active outreach from staff to deal with accounting for these sorts of residences?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, wonderful. I suppose that staff on the front line will be able to identify some of these properties within that allowance period. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, wonderful. How will we deal with a single residence with an incontinent member and also say a baby? So say you've got an elderly grandparent living with you and also a baby. Is this something that we're going to be able to deal with on the special consideration website, where you have 2 members of the family that requires that, so therefore 2 bags for weekly pickup?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So under the special considerations program, this is where residents would have the ability to apply. And the 1 bag limit on the week of collection will continue, but certainly in those circumstances that you mentioned, where there might be additional waste that is generated due to the makeup of the household, we will be taking those circumstances, into consideration to allow additional waste set out as needed.
I really do appreciate that. As somebody like up until about 2 years ago had 2 children with a diaper genie in each room, it would have to be about 8 feet tall to be able to jam that all into 1 bag. So appreciate the ability to identify that there's more than 1 user for special consideration. That will be very helpful. And again, I suppose it would be the same answer for group homes with several incontinent residents.
So thank you for the question. So we will be working with the Community and Social Services regarding group homes and rooming houses in order to ensure that they're licensed and registered, and then working on what the appropriate special considerations in those cases might be.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for that clarity. And how will it be operationalized, making the allowance for move in or out or spring cleaning? Is there going to be a separate website like special consideration where somebody can say, hey, you know, I'm moving out on this date, there's going to be extra bags?
So thank you, Councillor, for the question. So the intent here with staff's recommendation for council considering the yellow bag program would allow residents to purchase additional yellow bags to support move outs or whenever there's additional waste generated.
So then how will we deal with residents in difficult financial situations where $17, you know, for 4 extra bags might be cost prohibitive, you know, considering that a lot of food items that are much cheaper include quite a bit more plastic packaging?
Thank you, Councillor. So one of the things that we are working with our colleagues in Community and Social Services is offering a pilot program for the next year, is offering yellow bags for free of charge for clients receiving services through those programs.
So they'd be able to pick it up at some place like EORC or a community resource center, that sort of thing?
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the clarity on these items.
Thanks for your questions, Councillor. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate this. I think this is going to make a big difference. And I like the fact that we're talking about these things in pounds, 99 pounds. I know we always like to say kilograms, but reality meets the real world. I step on the scale in the morning and I know how much I weigh. It's not in kilograms. So anyway, that being said, the yellow bag program, just for clarity, so our audience can hear, it's still bi-weekly pickup, and the yellow bag would be an addition on a bi-weekly schedule, not every single week, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Good. And it's a good different. I just want to make sure people are fully aware of that, because you could have people throwing those yellow bags out on a regular basis. I was just speaking with the chair about, as well as the CCCs, the condos, you know, I have them chock-a-block, and I literally have 600 surrounding one park, 3 separate condo units, and you probably know which ones they are. That's going to be a real challenge for policing and bylaw services. So I really look forward to when we get closer to that. I do note the timeline though, and it's going to take a lot of fortitude and willingness. If, as you know, anything in the last year and a half prior to a municipal election is a very difficult thing to put in place. So if there's any possible way to speed things up, I think that would be advantageous to ensure that we're trying to adhere to those things. But from an implementation point of view, what would you be seeing at the earliest for those multi-residential pads? I see 2025 in there, but.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. So essentially, we begin that work immediately. Working in particular, we have 735 common pad properties across the city. I think we even have some of our staff going out to some of the properties within your ward, looking at opportunities for cart-based collection. There was some interest expressed by condominium boards. So that's what we'd be doing, is a site by site, but until we're able to visit all of those sites and have an understanding, but the intent, if we can implement solutions right away, we will be. But we do anticipate some of them we may have to pilot some different solutions. So certainly we'll be providing council with an update in a year, but keeping you up to date via memos as well.
And I really appreciate that. As I see some of our great members from bylaw services in the crowd tonight as well. I'm hoping whatever program, when you're dealing with such mass numbers of people, it will be in conjunction with the property owners. So we're not having to have, you know, bylaw services sitting around in a parking lot waiting for one person out of 200 units to come out and throw in an extra bag. It's better to deal with it from an ownership perspective and allow them to put their own constraints in place. I assume that's what we're probably looking at.
That's correct. Especially in the interim over the next few months, we'll be communicating with each of the property owners and condominium boards, providing them with adequate notice about the 3-item limit policy as well. So working with them in the short term.
Excellent. And last one, Mr. Chair, if you can indulge. People are naturally, they like images, and they like those very simple graphics. We see a lot of text in front of us. I've made some fancy ones up myself, and hopefully we can get to a real simple, 3 bins, 99 pounds, yellow bag, 450, like real simple infographics for people, because I'd like to get that message out. People naturally don't want to read, but they'll look at a picture. So just a food for thought. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this program is to reduce waste and to divert waste from the landfill. It's not to be punitive. It's not to create garbage police. We certainly don't want to create another layer. It's to make people realize that sending waste to the landfill has repercussions, right? Our landfill has a finite lifespan, and we want to curb the amount of waste that's being generated. I appreciate the communications plan. I'm just thinking the tax bills next month, the waste. I just got my waste calendar last week. I didn't read it top to bottom to see if we mention it. If it's not mentioned, perhaps the next waste calendar can talk about this program. I highly suggest community centers be points of locations where we sell the bags. I appreciate maybe some of the challenges the library has, but community center should be. If you need a direction, do you need direction? No. Okay. So I think I heard you say you're talking to Parks and Rec about potential partnership. You covered off shared pads. Okay. I'm a garbage collector. I come to your house when this program, you have 4 or more bags. What happens?
So in that case, Councillor, after the full, we've gone through the graduated enforcement, I will be collecting 3 items.
Do I leave a tag?
A courtesy tag gets left behind with the reason why that item was left behind.
Fair enough. Okay. Park dumping, concern of mine. So Park X becomes a new venue for garbage bag dumping. What is the plan to address this, to talk me through this process?
Thank you for the question. And before I get into it, I just want to reiterate that our partners in library are open and on board in order to support education being a venue in order to ensure that this message gets out. So I just wanted to make sure that that piece was clear. So regarding parks, so we have through the plan approved last year, we do have 2 additional inspectors. Right now, our collectors, when they're going, they're noting when there are instances of kitchen catcher type waste, which typically is from a household as opposed to the waste that was generated by the use of the park, and marking those spots. Our inspector will then go open the bag, see if there is any identifiable information to then go back and have that conversation with the resident. In addition, it is important for us to ensure that the message is clear that the waste receptacles that are at our parks are for the purpose and enjoyment of being in that space. And so really, I think some people think that, well, they're collected on a very good frequency. They're available to be used, but we need to curb and adjust that messaging as well.
Is there an opportunity to improve signage on our garbage bins? Some say, talk about dog waste, but are we at a point where we need to put signage on garbage bins that say, this is not for household waste, or for, you've renovated your homes, we see even other types of waste, but to consider that signage as well? And my other question is, what is the fine amount if we continue to have abuses, perhaps by the same household? What is the actual fine for dumping in a city park?
So for the first point, Councillor, yes, absolutely. Signage, I think, will be key in order to ensure that residents understand when they're going to the waste receptacle that this is not acceptable. So that is something certainly that we will consider and look to implement. Roger, I'm not sure if you're.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, Councillor, for parks, the set fine is $205.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I certainly support the rollout of this council endorsed plan. Education is top of mind. I think that's covered off and will be covered off well. I think locations where people can buy the additional tags is important, and I'm glad staff have looked at that. And my final concern, Chair, again, having come into office in 2014, even 4 years after when the green bin was first implemented, park dumping was a real issue. It has since subsided, but I'm concerned about what may happen once this new program comes in, and appreciate the plan and strategies that we have in place at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm really pleased with the amount of information in the presentation that outlined education and outreach initiatives. But I'd love to have staff describe what dedicated community outreach activities will look like in Ottawa community housing communities, because as one of the delegates had stated, we have communities that are row houses, that are duplexes, that will have a curbside pickup. I know in many of the OCH communities in my ward, I sometimes count 6, 8, 10 bags that are being left out every 2 weeks. So I'm just curious as to what the outreach will look like in those communities, especially since those communities are usually located in neighborhoods with lower waste diversion rates.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So I'll start, and Ghislain, if you want to add anything, feel free. So within those communities, today we work very closely with Ottawa Community Housing. They've been highly engaged through the development of the policy, so we'll continue that work as well. So there's twofold. Those are certainly some of the communities that we've already identified as low diverting that we will be engaging in door knocking and outreach within those communities, but also working very closely with Ottawa Community Housing and leveraging and working alongside some of the summer students, that they're also bringing on board solely dedicated to enhancing waste diversion. So they have a fairly robust team in place today. So we'll be looking to work very closely with them within those communities.
No, I appreciate that. I think it's very important to work with OCH because often some of the tenants aren't as engaged as we would like them to be in terms of civic engagement, wider engagement with the community. And there are a wide number of reasons for that. But notwithstanding that, I think it's important for us to ensure that we provide that information so it isn't a surprise to those community members come September. And I think the other element to share the concerns of Councillor Brockington is around dumping near those communities. Some of those communities are already experiencing challenges with dumping, and we haven't had this policy in place yet. So that is something that would also be of concern to myself in terms of adjacent properties. And so I know we've heard about parks. I'm just curious about how will we address dumping in adjacent properties to OCH communities.
I'll just ask if Mr. Chapman would like to come back and add commentary on that.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I missed that question. Can you repeat the question?
I was just wondering how the city or bylaw enforcement services will deal with the potential of dumping on adjacent private properties next to OCH properties.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. So definitely an investigation will take place. So often what we rely on is witnesses that can document what they've seen. We review that documented evidence and see if we could use that evidence to substantiate a charge. There's also, everybody has doorbell cameras now or cameras set up in their driveway. So, if there's an opportunity to review video evidence from neighboring properties, we'll do that as well.
And my last question just dovetails on Councillor Brockington's questions about fines in parks. What are the fines for dumping on private properties?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. Fines for dumping on private properties under the property maintenance bylaw. Those charges are the set fine is $300. Fines related to dumping on public property or city property are $500.
Appreciate those answers and those clarifications. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Curry.
Thank you. Just a question, the comment about the libraries considering having the bags being sold there. And I heard Councillor Brockington say he'd like the community centers, maybe first and foremost. However, I guess I would say to the libraries, if they would think about that further. I mean, libraries scan your book. They could easily scan a set of bags and your library card. And then that, like a technology solution is here. And then that sends an email to your email that says, pay this. Like, I mean, yeah, I've got 540 companies in the tech park, and I feel like there could be a solution here. It doesn't seem to me to be that difficult.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. I think the context that we probably should have given on that is more for the short-term implementation. Certainly, I think that's an opportunity we can explore further with them for long-term. What we're recommending here is leveraging the existing program and expanding, especially in the short term. Once we have a better idea of the sales and the revenue, we can certainly look at other opportunities, even including online-based sales.
Okay, I just think that would be better than having, you know, like singling out home hardware, as much as I love home hardware, but to have them go to our libraries and our community centers and keep it with us. Secondly, I want to ask us a general question. You know, I'm always so disappointed in every report when I get down to financial implications, and almost always there is the sentence, there are no financial implications. And I always just think, how can there be no financial implications? But I think I don't understand why that section is in the report. But I'm wondering, and maybe councillors need to think about this, but the section of every report that says financial implications, I think that's an opportunity to say the original motion was to have bag tags, and that came at a cost of X. I can't remember right now. This here is telling you what happened with this scenario, and the finances worked out to be this. But maybe you're going to tell me that's not what financial implications are. But I would just say to all of us, like, why do we have a section of all of our reports that say financial implications? And almost always they say there are no financial implications, which seems silly.
So we do have Patrick Power on the line, who is our financial services. So if he just wants to provide comment.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Chair, for the question. The financial implications section of that part of the report refers to implications that are having an impact on the 2024 budget. In this case, all the costs associated with the program for 2024 are already built into the budget. So there are no implications that council will have to approve an increase or a decrease in expenditures or revenues for the 2024. That is the purpose of that section of the financial implications. But certainly in the body of the report, we can provide additional context in cases where other programs have been discussed in relation to this program and the financial situations of those programs and whatnot. But the section that Councillor is referring to specifically answers the question, is there an impact on the 2024 budget? Either expenditures or revenues, either increases or decreases. And that's why in this report, there are no financial implications, because all monies involved with this report are already built into existing budgets.
Okay, thank you. However, I would still say it would be strange to me that there wouldn't be some decrease to the budget. I mean, I realize we don't do zero-based budgeting, but I mean, has no one yet really calculated that fully to say that this is a different program now? It's not the tags. I'm just trying to figure out the dates. Our budget was approved last year. Did it contemplate the bag tag option? Like, I don't understand how there could be no financial implications. I guess I'm always thinking that.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. So in terms of, because Council did not approve the tag-based option, any of the financial projections we had with the cost of that was null and void. It wasn't put forward as part of the 2024 budget, which is why you're not seeing that within the report. But I think your comments are important for us to take away for consideration too, for future reports from us.
Okay, thank you. Is everyone else understanding what I'm saying here? Like, if this is a different program, there had to be a different cost. So somewhere in there, we need to see that, I think, for even the next budget round. Was there then a savings? Like, it just is equal, completely equal? I'll leave it at that, but I think you hear me. And then maybe we need to always be asking this question for every report that says there are no financial implications. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Curry. And just, I think Councillor Luloff might have an answer on the library question that was asked too, just as Chair of the Library Board. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we were approached by Solid Waste in Q4 of 2023 with a request to discuss the possibility of selling yellow bags in the library branches. We replied in January offering to support and collaborate with Solid Waste on the promotion of waste management services and connecting with citizens more broadly for public education and programming. We further indicated that selling bags does not align with our mandate, unfortunately. In subsequent conversations, Solid Waste and OPL have worked on ways to promote proper recycling of batteries, to provide referrals to branches with battery recycling bins, and library staff are certainly open to further collaboration. The issues are that the Public Libraries Act of Ontario mandates libraries to allow citizens to reserve and borrow materials and use reference and information services. Our vision is to build community and transform lives, and our mission is to inspire learning, spark curiosity, and connect people. The library supports literacy, the joys of reading, learning, discovering, and creating. We do have a policy regarding solicitation and petitioning, which broadly does not permit solicitation or petitioning the library on our property. Exceptions are noted in the policy for the Friends of Ottawa Public Library and the Legion. OPL operates a roving model in which staff are mobile throughout the facility to assist clients at the point of need. So therefore, cash handling has been limited by recent initiatives such as the materials recovery model implemented in January 2021, which was the removal of fines. So handling cash on the premises is very, very limited. So therefore, it is not operationally feasible for the OPL to administer stock and sales for physical items and branches on behalf of different organizations and for materials unrelated to our purpose and mandate. I hope that provides a little bit of curiosity, or it's not curiosity, it's a little bit of background for you. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Luloff. I will just commend the library on their handout of the Eclipse classes prior to that event. That was really well received by a lot of the community, and appreciate the extra information there for committee members. Councillor Hill, you're up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all the work on this file. It's come a long ways over the last year and a bit, and I appreciate where it is. I think we're getting into a really good place. I want to drill a little bit into a couple of points. The first thing I want to understand a bit better is, what is it that we mean when we talk about residents living in areas with lower waste diversion rates? Is that simply talking about areas where there are a higher number of people living in houses, or is this something different?
So Councillor, twofold. So one, we're using the set out study data that we undertook in 2022. That gave us an understanding of participation in recycling and green bin programs across the city, as well as garbage set out rates. So that's one of the insights that we'll be using to help us choose communities. But Ghislaine, feel free to jump in here too. Going back to some of the market research that we undertook in 2019 and again in 2020, as part of that, we were able to develop market segments and have an understanding of areas within the city based on demographics for those that have a lower participation rate. So we're using that with some of the tools we have available to us to identify different pockets across the city that have those demographic profiles of households that typically have lower diversion rates.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, this is a combination of the demographics in the area and your market study that looked at the actual cutting open of bags and outputs.
It wasn't the waste audit, Councillor, as a set out study. So that was where we went and did counts. So we physically went out and observed if there was a green bin as well as recycling set out, and then how many bags or bins or items were set out at the curb.
Okay, thank you. Because certainly I think a very fair complaint that I hear from a number of residents about this new program is the fact that they live in a household with 7 people versus a household with 2 people, and that's not fair. And so my commentary to them is, well, the point of this program is not to be fair. It's to do all the appropriate diversion for all the right reasons. But I'm just trying to understand a bit better how we get to that analysis of those areas, because certainly when I think about South Barrhaven, I mean, it's exploding, and the number of extended families that live in some of those places are significant. So thank you. My second question is about the yellow bag program. I'm not completely clear on why we don't have a broader retail support base to this. Is there something more that can be done here in order to further expand this so that it's easier access to get these yellow bags?
Certainly, Councillor. So what we're looking at was leveraging, with the direction from Council, was looking at the opportunity to leverage the existing administration of the program, which has the partnership with those current retailers. But what we are recommending, because this would be more broad scale than the less than 500 businesses that we have participating in the Yellow Bag program, that we want to look more broadly across the city. So city recreation facilities, recognizing city-owned, looking at that as first, but certainly we can also be looking at additional retailers that would go through a formal RFP process. But what we're also wanting to do is have a good understanding of the actual sales volumes. At this point, all we have to go on is what the experience of other municipalities has been. So certainly after a year, once we have a better understanding of program uptake, we can look at further expanding the program as well into different retail locations.
Okay. Would some of the research that was done when the initial concept of the bag tag program was being floated be crossoverable to this analysis? Because essentially buying yellow bags is very similar to the idea of a bag tag concept. So would you not already have some of that data in order to help inform that?
Yes, Councillor, and that's what we're using, but they're high-level estimates, and that was also based on the 2.1 item limit as well. So recognizing that this is higher, where we have about 85% of households that are already setting out 3 items or less, we anticipate it to be lower. But as per that original report, we really need to have a good understanding until we really broad scale look at alternative solutions. It's what our typical sales will be.
Okay, thank you. And has Acobia been involved at all in some of this discussion? Because I'm sure they could probably help reach out to their Main Street businesses to enable some of this.
We have not yet, but we'll take that away, Councillor.
And I guess my last question about yellow bags, I didn't think I'd talk as much about yellow bags as I am, but I'm interested in it, is counterfeiting. I can just imagine that somebody's going to be interested if you could sell, 4 plastic bags for $17 or whatever, that somebody's going to get smart and try and replicate this somehow. Is there some kind of a method or at least a concept of consideration so that we don't run into some kind of a black market yellow bag system?
Yes, Councillor. So it's something we'll certainly be keeping an eye on, but we are, with the yellow bags themselves, we are looking at enhancing the unique identifiers on them to make it very difficult to replicate.
Okay, thank you. And then just because I want Roger to get his steps in, I do have a couple more bylaw questions. What I heard this morning is that there's a bylaw fine of $500 if someone illegally dumps in a park. There's a bylaw fine of $300 if someone dumps on private property. There's a bylaw fine of $205 if somebody throws something illegally in a park bin. I guess my question on that is, when was the last time we looked at modifying those fines, and would it be perhaps a consideration for us as we go into a phase looking at general deterrence to amend those consequences for illegal dumping? And I say that from the perspective, like, this is a deliberate action. This isn't like driving through a speed camera where you make a whoopsie. This is you purposefully take a bag of garbage, you put it in your vehicle, and you drive 3 blocks away and you throw it in the bushes. That is something that I think carries consequences, and I would love to hear from you if there's perhaps some consideration for modification in order to, preemptively create some form of deterrence for dumping.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, excuse me. Thank you for the question. Yes, certainly we can have a look at that. It's a good point. I can tell you that the use and care of roads bylaw dumping provision was the fine increase was applied in 2022. I'm not sure when the parks and property maintenance bylaw were increased, but certainly it's been a while. So it's something we'll do a scan of other municipalities to see what their set fines are at. And we can make that request to the Chief Justice of Ontario to see if we can get those fines increased.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I guess informally, you're taking that as direction to take a look at that then?
I'm looking over at legal just to make sure we can take direction on set fines, but either way, it's not a formal direction, but we can certainly take that on to make that request through the Chief Justice.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation and all the work that I know has gone in behind the scenes. Very briefly talking about the agricultural exemptions. True story, I was chatting to a few farmers in the feed store this weekend, and they saw in the newspaper that we were going to be implementing a firm limit. And of course, they asked, what about my farm? And I did chat about the outreach survey that staff had sent to the agricultural operations in the city, and a few looks like I have never seen that before. So can we chat very briefly about the communication methods that we're going to use with agricultural operations so they know that they can put out more than 3 items between a particular set of dates? And as always, I have a few suggestions that I can provide offline as to how to get the message out.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. So the intent here is to be quite targeted and we will be doing a mail out directly to the just under 1,300 properties. And happy to take your feedback and suggestions offline on how best to frame the communication on that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tierney.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair. This one really gets me, so I enjoy it. So in our first evolution, we were talking about originally 2 bags and originally a tag program that would see a new level of bureaucracy. We planned on mailing tags. It would have cost the taxpayers a ton of money for the people that are actually doing a good job. Versus what we see now is a already existing program with the yellow bags, which is good. So essentially, it's a pay to pitch. If you don't want to try to meet the standard and you don't want to burden the rest of the entire city because you're unable to meet those targets, it's a fair assumption to call this a pay to pitch program versus what would have been a brand new bureaucracy costing millions of dollars to taxpayers.
That's correct, Councillor.
That's all I was looking for clarification on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Tierney. I don't see any other hands up or questions or comments. I do want to thank staff for all the work going into this. We had a really successful sponsors group meeting, working through a lot of questions about sort of which item gets left if at the curb, if there's more than 3, how do people pick, and those questions. So just want to thank the members of the sponsors group as well, who were attending that and their input into this. Obviously, this is progress. I think it's helpful to see us moving in this direction to reduce our waste to landfill. So I think with that, are the recommendations carried? Great. Okay. So we have our next item with the electrification of public works small equipment. I am going to just ask, do people want just a 5-minute break? It's noon, I see, 10 afternoon. Do we want just a 5-minute break, bathroom break or refreshment break of some sort? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 12:15 and resume then. Thanks. Councillor Devine as well. Okay, we're good. Thank you, Councillor Luloff. All right, so we've got quorum and we're good to start. I know Councillor Brockington had to leave. Staff have a presentation for us on the electrification of public works equipment. And I will hand it over to, there's one delegation on this item, I believe, that might be here too. Okay, James Scott McKillop. So we'll go to him after the staff presentation. I'll hand it over to staff to take us through the PowerPoint.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Et merci d'avoir signalé aussi la Semaine nationale des travaux publics ce matin. I'm pleased to be here this morning or this afternoon with Alison Downs, the Parks Maintenance and Forestry Director, who's going to be speaking to you in terms of the Public Works approach to electrifying our small equipment. And because we also have been taking a broader corporate approach to this, I'm also pleased that Dan Brisebois from Recreation Culture Facility Services is also here to speak to the efforts that they have been doing in terms of the electrifying of their equipment. And we're also joined online virtually by Deputy Chief Louise Hein Schmidt from Fire Services, should there be questions related to Fire Services efforts to electrify their smaller equipment. So the report that's before you is very much specific to Public Works, but certainly we're providing the opportunity to provide basically that broader corporate view. So with that, I will hand over the presentation to Alison Downs.
Merci, Alain. In 2022, next slide, please. Sorry. In 2022, Council approved a motion directing Public Works to phase out gas-powered lawn and yard equipment and replace with an electric alternative when operationally feasible to do so. L'équipe des travaux publics avait déjà commencé à mettre à l'essai certaines pièces d'équipement électrique, donc la plupart au service de la circulation et au service forestier. Nous voulions donc élargir nos efforts afin de mettre à l'essai et de l'utilisation cet équipement électrique à plus grande échelle dans la direction générale. Today, I'll give you an overview of everything we've learned and how we're going to manage the transition to electric equipment going forward. Next slide, please. Public Works went beyond the original scope of the motion and looked at opportunities to transition all of our small gas-powered equipment to electric where an appropriate option was available. We focused on 6 main components of the transition plan. We first established an inventory in Public Works of small equipment. We have approximately 1,000 pieces of small gas-powered equipment. Most of that inventory, approximately 860, is yard and landscape equipment. And most of that falls within my service area, Parks Maintenance and Forestry. Secondly, staff conducted a municipal scan by surveying 40 municipalities, of which 19 responded. Many had tested electric equipment, but no one we surveyed had fully transitioned. They had all expressed similar challenges in the transition that we did, including the need for costly infrastructure upgrades to address electrical charging capacity, issues with battery power, and a general hesitancy about the industry's readiness for wide-scale commercial use. Thirdly, staff conducted testing of several pieces of electric equipment for the Public Works wide range of maintenance activities. While setting up for the pilot testing, it became apparent that we had a knowledge gap around the charging capacity at city yards, and a full transition would require electric capacity assessment of all our yards. The 5th component of our approach was to do a preliminary assessment of the financial and environmental implications of transitioning to electric equipment to support decision-making. Finally, throughout the pilot, we had shared our experiences with other city departments like RCFS and Fire Services. I will also mention that EPS, their policy branch, will be undertaking a review of potential regulations surrounding small two-stroke engine-powered equipment in Q3 of this year, and results and findings are expected to be reported to committee and council in Q3 of 2025. Next slide, please. Now I'll share the results of the electric equipment testing. Durant le printemps et l'été de 2022 et 2023, les équipes de travaux publics ont mis à l'essai une variété des appareils électriques dont la liste apparaît sur cette diapositive pour effectuer des travaux d'entretien dans les parcs, les boisiers, en bordure des routes et des emprises et terrains pleins. For each type of equipment, multiple brands were used to ensure a variety of products were tested. Equipment was tested in different neighborhoods across the city, in differing weather conditions, so wet and dry seasons, and in differing growing seasons throughout the spring and summer. Crews also used the equipment to complete a wide range of daily activities and tasks. Based on the equipment testing, staff found that 5 types of electric equipment can be used for some of Public Works maintenance operations. That equipment is listed on the slide and highlighted in green. The complicating factor is the battery technology and the number of batteries required to operate a given piece of equipment for a day's work, which can be, it varies, but it can be up to 5. The 4 items highlighted on the slide in red lack the sufficient battery power for our operations, so it can't be widely used at this time. We are still trying to understand the life cycle and durability of electric small equipment with our respect to our ability to repair it and the availability of replacement parts, as well as the durability of the equipment and the longevity of the batteries themselves. In general, electric equipment was slightly quieter and it's exhaust-free compared to its gas-powered equipment counterpart. However, no electrical equipment tested was quieter than the 85 decibels, so it still requires staff to wear ear protection. As of the end of 2023, Public Works has 234 pieces of electric equipment that will be used for maintenance across the city. And so that represents approximately 21% of our total small equipment inventory. We plan to continue testing and assessing the market for improvements to battery technology and commercial grade equipment. We are continually looking for opportunities where it makes sense to transition. Next slide, please. Dan, I'll pass it to you to explain facilities experience.
Merci, Ali. Bon après-midi au comité. I'm Dan Breesbaum, the Director of Facility Services for the City of Ottawa. Similar to our colleagues in Parks and Forestry, we've been undergoing a similar process. I would note 2 differences, however. The scope and size of our small equipment pales in comparison to our colleagues. The intensity of use also is significantly less, and therefore the turnover rate of our equipment is different. To date, we have over 100 pieces of our equipment that have been electrified, which represents about 32% of our entire stock. Some areas of our equipment have been completely electrified. All arenas across the city are using electric ice edgers across all the facilities. With regards to ice resurfacers, we're currently employing 4 electric ice resurfacers, and we just received, that's the picture on the screen, we just received 4 additional ice resurfacers recently. This enables us to continue our services while we transition our various fleet of equipment across the board. Regarding electrical study, as the city moves to electrify various pieces of equipment, whether small engine pieces, as you see here today, or whether building components or electric vehicle charging, a lot of this activity ties back to the electrical panel at the facilities. For this reason, we need to get a clear understanding as to what capacity is left in our panels at our facilities and what our providers, whether Ottawa Hydro or Hydro One, have further capacity available in the local transformer to provide and increase capacity to the facility to take in electricity. We've begun this study and we hope to have a report back to committee and council later this year. With regards to equipment turnover, we continue to work with our colleagues in Public Works to understand the market changes as it evolves so we can further change our equipment as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Oh, Dan Nelson,
we have-
more to go?
Yeah, just a couple more
All
slides.
right.
Sorry about that. Next slide, please. So we worked with the climate change resiliency team to assess the GHG emissions of gas-powered equipment that we determined has a suitable electric alternative to see how much we could reduce the GHGs through the transition. And we found that there'd be a reduction if we transitioned all of the equipment we're able of approximately 224 kilograms. And that's equivalent to 10,290 propane barbecue cylinders, or the amount of carbon sequestered by 3,704 trees. Of course, beyond the GHG reductions, electric equipment reduces other air pollutants. Sorry. Next slide, please. As stated earlier, Public Works took a broad approach to our transition plan, which included assessment of things outside of the equipment itself that would be critical to a successful gas to electric transition. And there are four main interdependencies. One is the one Dan was talking about with respect to the electrical capacity assessment at city facilities, and Public Works is working with Dan's team on that assessment. And that assessment, as Dan mentioned, is considering and aligned to other strategies such as our Green Fleet strategy. The second interdependency is battery technology itself, as it's still evolving. And what we buy today may be obsolete in a few years, and that the batteries are also proprietary to specific brands. We expect that suppliers will react to the increasing demand for commercial grade equipment as municipalities and larger institutions start to transition. So we're closely monitoring the battery brands for their charging power and runtime, so we can make decisions and about purchasing the best battery technology for our maintenance work. The third interdependency is around fire safety. We'll be working with Ottawa Fire Services to determine fire risk due to battery charging and transportation. And the final interdependency is cost. There are some unknowns that prevent us from knowing the full cost implications of transitioning gas to electric, like whether we have the ability to repair the equipment, if we can get component parts, how long the equipment actually lasts. And without knowing this life cycle of the equipment, it's difficult to budget for. So staff are taking a gradual approach to purchasing this equipment, and we plan to absorb the purchase into our current budgets. Next slide, please. So while Public Works has made good progress in our gas to electric transition, we are looking forward to continuing our efforts in this initiative. We are working with RCFS and Fire Services as they are on their journey as well. We want to be leaders amongst municipalities in this initiative, and we'll be monitoring the market and testing new equipment as it becomes available. We're keen to share our experiences with other departments as well as other municipalities and learn from theirs. Public Works focus will be on transitioning the right equipment at the right time. That means we'll transition to electric when it meets our operational needs and we have the electrical capacity at our yards and other logistics in place. To keep members of council aware of our progress on this initiative, we'll be communicating our annual use of electric equipment via the seasonal transition memo that Public Works issues each spring. So next slide. I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you. And we're happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that presentation. We do have one delegation, James Scott McKillop. So I'll just ask them to come up and speak to this item, and then we'll have questions for staff afterwards. So I'll just ask you just to click on the microphone there. It should go red once you click it on. All right, there we are.
Thank
And
you.
we've got 5 minutes to address the committee.
Okay, thank you. I have a speech impediment, so please be easy on me here today. My name is James Scott McKillop. I'm a small business owner here in Ottawa. Very pleased to be here today at the Climate Change Committee. Unfortunately, I'm seeing many changes happening regarding Ottawa's environment, but most aren't even noticing how the UN sustainability goals are involved. From my understanding, everything from waste diversion to the green fleet strategy to energy evolution strategy to wastewater-based epidemiology is involved. But today I'm here to discuss the electrification of public works involved in the green fleet strategy. Seems there's several electrical standardization organizations involved in this green fleet strategy, including SCC, IEC, ISO, IEEE, CSA, and the ITU. For example, Francois Collier, SCC governing council member, a member of the IEC, IEEE, etc., seems to feel this strategy is involved in the Internet of Things, digital twins, AI robotics, big data analytics, driverless vehicles, smart cities, etc. Francois Collet even seems to think this is involved in a science called biodigital convergence. I suggest everyone research Francois Collier if you think I'm crazy right now. And his work with the SCC, IEC, and the IEEE. He's responsible for international electrotechnical standards in regards to the Internet of Things, digital twins, and the standards organization involved seems to feel the underlying technologies in the green fleet strategy is a smart city issue at Smart City Ottawa. Now, I've been researching the electrical standards involved in Smart City Ottawa for nearly 4 years. And I'd never have learned of the Green Fleet strategy unless it was for this research. I find it very concerning that the Environmental and Climate Change Committee aren't discussing the topics, especially when you're referring to the underlying technologies involved. Maybe you're like the majority of Ottawa residents and truly aren't aware, which I find even more alarming. I find this so concerning that I started an ethics committee of concerned citizens to both educate Ottawa residents and address our concerns at different Ottawa committees and Ottawa City Council. We want some answers regarding the underlying technologies behind the scenes with this green fleet strategy in the Ottawa Smart City. I asked the Environmental and Climate Change Committee to address these issues at your next meeting on June 18th. Because many of the subjects you're speaking of, whether it's getting rid of gas equipment and introducing electric vehicles, clean energy, wastewater, water monitoring, renewable energy, etc., they seem to be involved with the electrotechnical and telecommunications standards involved with the Internet of Things at the Ottawa Smart City level. I'd love to be wrong regarding my claims, but so I beg you that we work together on finding a solution for the Ottawa residents questioning the international standards I mentioned today that seem to be associated with many of the issues involved with the Environment and Climate Change Committee. Some of these residents are very concerned and how they can properly comply with these international standards. Now, I'll be back at the committee on June 18th with a PowerPoint presentation to prove my claims I made here today. I deeply, deeply hope that you will give me the time on the 18th and not take it too hard on me after I'm done speaking here. Thanks for having me here today. I deeply appreciate your willingness to get to the bottom of the claims I made today. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for being out. On June 18th, I think right now we're set to discuss the solid waste master plan. And so with delegates, we ask that they speak to the item at hand. There are items that might overlap with some of what you're talking about. We're also talking about the potential wildlife strategy either that day or day before.
I could actually relate those strategies both to these international standards too, sir.
That's what's important to do, is just to relate the item to the business at hand. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the future.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right, so we are on to questions of staff and comments from committee. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm extremely pleased with the update that the Public Works Department has provided concerning their progress on the use of electric-powered small equipment that meets operational needs. and that Public Works indeed went above and beyond the scope of the motion, which I really appreciate. So I'd really like to thank Allison and her team for those efforts. I do have a number of questions. And so I was wondering if you could describe how the Public Works Department is testing electric equipment to determine its operational suitability.
So we're focused right now specifically on the lawn and yard equipment, and we tested a number of different brands, giving them to various crews across the city so that they could test it in different conditions and different growing seasons to understand how it worked and whether or not we were able to meet our maintenance quality standards with respect to maintenance, various maintenance activities that we're doing in our various service areas. And like I mentioned, there were 5 pieces of equipment specifically related to the lawn and yard equipment that did with their batteries power did meet the standards, meet our maintenance quality standards that we were expecting to see. In addition to that, we are keeping an eye on the market for other pieces of equipment that we run, and would introduce any testing of pieces of equipment when they have the commercial piece available for us.
I appreciate that. And I was wondering if you could also describe the new infrastructure requirements needed to support the gas to electric transition.
So I don't know if Dan can get into the details of that, but we are participating in the electrical capacity study that is being led by facilities. I think there are 10 of our yards that are on the list to be looked at. And just understanding the electrical load brought into the facility and the facility itself, its ability to handle the electrical requirements. So I'll pass it to Dan.
Thanks, Chair. As communicated earlier, whether it's small engines or building components or EV chargers, it all ties back to the electrical panel of the site. And we're conducting that study now to determine how much capacity we have at different locations. Resulting from that study, it may require some strategic investments to increase the capacity at some sites. I should note as well too, not all city yards were built to be a city yard. Some of it had a previous life as another entity, and therefore the electrical capacity of that particular yard may be very different from its brothers and sisters across the city.
I appreciate that. And, being on site, and I want to really thank you for the tour. We had a tour in beautiful Britannia Park of the facilities, and we saw the infrastructure changes that were necessary and that had been made. And so we know that there's been great work that's been undertaken there. The department in the report stated that it's planning to gradually phase in electric equipment as it makes sense operationally. And I can imagine that also has to deal with the logistical challenges of the facilities. But I'm just wondering if staff can provide an estimate as to the timeline when all equipment that can be replaced will be replaced.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. It is a little tricky. As soon as we understand the electrical capacity assessment and understand which yards are easiest to transition and where it makes the most sense to transition, we'll at the same time looking at battery technology and trying to understand the battery technology at that time and when it makes sense to invest. We'll be going through that process, and our transition plan will be strategic in the sense we are looking at facilities where we can charge on site, so minimize the amount of batteries needed per piece of equipment, at smaller parks, maybe in the core, so they're closer to the yards that serve them and that kind of thing. So it will be a strategic transition approach that I suspect will happen in the couple of years after the facility review is complete. It's all a plan where we are measuring the cost of transitioning the pieces of equipment with our ability to absorb that cost within our operational budgets.
I appreciate that approach because it's a gradual phase in of the equipment that makes sense operationally, and it also incorporates the purchases into current operating budget. So I think it's a very prudent approach that's been taken. Just want to reiterate, Chair, that I really do appreciate all the work that has been undertaken on the electrification of small engine equipment by not just Public Works, but by other departments, whether it's recreation, the fire service. I'm really appreciative of all those efforts and all the amount of work that has been undertaken in terms of municipal scans, in terms of evaluating the technology. And I really think that this has been an excellent first step towards addressing concerns around noise and air pollution from gas-powered equipment, especially within the inner urban core. So really appreciative of the efforts that have been undertaken by staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks to you for your efforts from last term as well in providing the recommendation and direction to staff with where we are now and all the work that went into that. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, thank you. And I join you in thanking Councillor King for his motion that brought this forward. It was a staff inquiry. It's a great step forward, and appreciate it very much, and appreciate the work that's being done. In terms of the noise, 85 decibels. I wanted to know what it is for gas, because I wanted to know the comparison, because I get that that staff will still need to wear some sort of ear protection. But one of the concerns that was out there is that it's noisy for the community when you're out there cutting grass, et cetera. So neighbors hear it loud and clear. So there's some kind of reduction. So I just wanted to know what the comparison is.
Thank you, Chair, for that question. We definitely have that information. I might not have it at my fingertips, so we can get back to you. It is louder than 85 decibels, though.
Yeah, I think that'll help a lot in terms of the concerns, because I think that's what brings it to people's attention, is hearing how loud this equipment is, and so it's definitely a reduction. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is the NCC's kind of doing the same thing. They're looking at their equipment as well and looking at switching over to electric. Have we had any conversations with them since we're all in the same area?
We have been in close touch with them through the last couple of years that we've been doing our testing. So we are definitely working together with their experience and our experience. There are a few major differences in our business models. We own all of our equipment. We deploy crews at approximately 30 yards across the city, and we do this work in-house, whereas their business model is largely to use contracted services. So it is a little bit of a different business model, but we're definitely comparing experiences.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
In terms of the recommendations, I think the one that I was sort of surprised with that didn't make the list of yeses was the blower, because I see people use them at their homes sometimes, the leaf blowers, and they're pretty loud. And yeah, I wouldn't have thought they would be. I thought they'd make a good candidate for switching over. What was the issue with that?
It's mostly the battery power and the power required of the blower in doing the work that we do in maintenance, in parks maintenance and in roads, where we're blowing often wet leaves and wet sand. And so it's just a difference in activity that we would do in our work than as compared to a resident.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate these first steps, and thank you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. I just want to validate that we're procuring the equipment because of the functional task and the fact that improving our fleet allows us to do the operational requirements that we need to do. And that is the primary function of this fleet renewal. Having additional electrified equipment is a value add to that. We're looking to do that where we can, but we're not compromising on the standards of the operational requirements in order to move to a technology prematurely. Is that a fair comment?
That's correct, Chair. Thank you.
And I think that was reflected in the slide where you showed due diligence to, there were 6 or 7 pieces of equipment that are going to be fleet managed and electrified, whereas there were 4 or 5 that at this point don't meet the thresholds. But just given the way that technology is trending, I would imagine in a few years' time when you revisit that there may be some changes to that. Is that a fair way to look at that?
Thank you, Chair. That's very fair.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Am I correct in saying that there's going to be some, when the maintenance crews go out to use this equipment, there's going to be some drills that are going to enable them to be as effective as possible? Because certainly I've heard the concern that, they go out, the battery dies, and then they're inefficient because they need to drive back to the depot and recharge or get a new battery, or there's going to be a reduction in operational efficiency through this. Is that a fallacy? And you've taken that into consideration in order to ensure that you're maximizing your operational outcomes as per what the equipment was designed to do in the first place?
Thank you for that question, Chair. We have done an assessment of the number of batteries that are required per piece of equipment for that person's beat, if you will. So if they're out for 3 hours in the morning, they take the number of batteries with them that are required. So there isn't a driving back and forth to the yard. That is what our process is at this time.
I appreciate that. And I noted that you spoke specifically to safety and fire safety concerns. I think that's really important for us as we look at, the potential of having a massive battery farm that's getting charged overnight in order to ensure that the next morning everything's ready to go. And that's certainly when you look at, some of the statistics on lithium-ion battery fires. There are concerns that go with that, especially if they're all co-located in one location. So I'm keen, I think, to hear back more on the precautions and the fire safety impacts in terms of how the charging bays are going to be applied. And my last, question is, and if you can't answer it right now, we can suss this out and talk about it over time. But I want to ensure, as we're looking at the environmental impacts from a GHG emissions perspective, that we're also very closely monitoring the environmental impacts from a life cycle management process, especially when we look at end of life management. I'm extremely concerned if we're going to be buying 6 to a dozen batteries for a whippersnapper, that one of those batteries gets a chip in the corner because somebody bumped it against a truck or something, and it's no longer fit for usable life. That the process we have to manage that, in fact, does not translate to us, having a massive pit out in our landfill that's building up all these batteries. And I think that's an important consideration as we look at electrification going forward, is how we're managing battery management. Is the current process going to look at circular economy constructs whereby the private entity that we're procuring the batteries it's going to go back to them, or are we going to be fully responsible for the batteries once we've procured them?
Thank you, Chair, for that question. Certainly, a long-term battery disposal strategy will be a consideration that we look into when we are looking at a fuller transition to electric small equipment. My friend, Mr. McDonald, may want to speak to the GHG emissions and how we make that assessment. And I don't know if you want to speak more about the battery disposal or not.
So Chair, the emissions targets and GHG inventories that were approved by Council do not take into consideration embodied carbon or that life cycle value. But in April of 2023, Council approved the Climate Change Master Plan priority projects, one of which was to assess the feasibility of including embodied carbon. This is work that we'll be undertaking to inform the refresh of the Carbon Change Master Plan and energy evolution. Unfortunately, I'm not able to speak to the disposal strategy at this point, however.
So Chair, maybe if I can elaborate too, because we have been working also with our solid waste team in terms of a recycling program in terms of the battery. So right now, basically the part of the pilot includes also having the ability to be able to recycle those batteries. And that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at moving forward, is basically what's the appropriate disposal strategy as part of that.
No, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate you allowing me to dwell on this a little bit. It's just that, when we look at an old prototype whippersnipper or whatever piece of equipment, once you strip that down at end of life, all of the material is fairly benign. But when you take electrified equipment and the batteries that go with it, there are toxic materials in there that we need to make sure are properly managed and that we're not, exchanging one devil for another. So I appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the presentation. There wasn't any financial information included in the presentation. Do we have any cost comparisons between a gas-powered whippersnipper and an electric whippersnipper?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. In terms of the equipment itself, based on the prices we can get at the city, the gas-powered might be slightly higher. It's when we have to buy the batteries that bring the electric piece higher, the cost of the electric piece higher.
What's the cost of a battery?
On average, I think it's between $200 and $300.
And we need 3, 4, 5 of those per piece of equipment to get through a standard day?
Between 3 and 5.
Okay, so there's a significant financial impact. And so I can appreciate that we're only transitioning when it makes sense operationally to do so. But I didn't realize there was so much slack in the budget that we could actually accommodate that and not impact any work. Do we track the increase in electricity bills through facilities, or do we have any of those, any of that data?
Right now, with respect to our pilot, it is quite small. So the electric costs would be not very significant. However, we did work with our corporate energy office to get some idea of costs. And to charge the batteries that we are using right now, it would be approximately $17 per battery, or as low as $3 per battery, because the charging, depending on when you charge and how you charge and where you charge, we get a different rate, electricity rate. So that's the range. I mentioned earlier that if we have approximately 860 pieces of lawn and yard equipment. So if we're averaging 4 batteries per piece, the cost would be anywhere between $10,000 to $60,000 a year to charge those batteries. The gas that is used right now for the same amount of equipment is approximately $143,000 a year.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, what have we heard from the operators who are using the gas-powered equipment and then are asked to use the electrical equipment? Has it been positive on the whole? Are there challenges that we're trying to address?
Part of the piloting did include surveys from staff, and we have had, for the most part, positive feedback. There may have been issues with respect to some of the brands that we tested where the battery wasn't quite as powerful. So when they were comparing pieces of equipment, depending on the brand, they may have been less satisfied with some brands. I will say at the parks where we're able to use this equipment and charge the battery on site, we've had very positive feedback from staff.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. In the future, I would appreciate seeing some financial comparators. I think if we're talking about transitioning an entire fleet, it would be helpful to see what we've spent and then the cost comparisons between the different types of equipment. But other than that, thank you very much, and I appreciate the time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I mean, I do agree on the financial portion of this. It's a lot of interest because as we're switching, it looks like we're savings on the operations side, but then there's some capital investment as we switch over. So it is relevant information. I appreciate those comments. Councillor Curry?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to reread this motion from Councillor King. When it says that, in fact, the motion asks that staff commit to phasing out the use of gas-powered equipment. It's just that you commit to phasing it out, sort of almost regardless, other than the equipment has to require replacement and it has to meet operational needs. So what do you take meeting operational needs to mean?
It's at a very high level, the ability to do our work within our maintenance quality standards.
So it doesn't have to do with cost or whether this is actually worse for the environment due to embodied carbon. Like you wouldn't take into consideration those things. It's just purely if you can get the grass cut and the leaves blown to your maintenance standards.
Well, I think we would definitely consider cost, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this at a slow and steady rate, is because we want to absorb the costs into our ongoing operational budget, which we would have for equipment replacement in general. With respect to the replacement, as they are life cycled, one of the issues with the gas-powered equipment is that they can last for a very, very long time. So it's a bit of a balance. We want to be leaders in this space. We want to electrify when we are able to do so, but it needs to make sense.
Okay, but really operational needs is seen as somewhat limited.
So Chair, also the piece to expand is that I think this is a market where the industry is still very much in evolution. The batteries that we have now will continue to evolve. So basically the discussion right now in terms of trying to price a transition, the reason why it's very difficult is because basically we are seeing a lot of fluctuations in terms of the market, in terms of the evolution of mainly the battery technology. So the intent of taking this low gradual approach is also recognizing that the batteries will continue to evolve. Right now, one of the challenges that we're dealing with is basically once you start buying batteries from a manufacturer, it pretty much works on their units only. So what we want to make sure is that we don't catch ourselves where basically now we're essentially pre-committing to specific suppliers where now it starts to limit also the competitiveness of the market. So cost is very much part of the equation. It's not just around, well, as soon as it meets the operational requirement, we just jump right into it. We also need to make sure that we're able to sustain it. And part of that is making sure that basically there is more stability in that market. And that will come. I think there is very much a big push there. We've seen basically a lot of movement in terms of manufacturers around building better products, especially for commercial application, not just the residential, but the commercial application. And as we see that maturity, that's when you'll see us basically continue in terms of our transition or to that adoption. But I just don't want to leave with the impression that cost doesn't matter. Cost very much matters in terms of our transition.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. The other part of it is that embodied carbon concept that's not in our energy evolution document, our climate change. And I understand, I guess that's going to be a recommendation. Hopefully it is. But wouldn't that potentially change this entirely?
In terms of?
So if part of the new guidelines for our master plan tell you that you need to consider embodied carbon in everything you do and all the decisions you make, that could change this.
It would still be added to the calculation that I can let Will speak to the more specifics, but it would just be another item that we would overlay in terms of our current assessment. So I don't think that it would change necessarily the direction that we're taking, because again, one of the limiting factor is the availability and the maturity of the market right now. So, and that's the piece that we want to make sure that we are careful in terms of our transition approach, that we don't go in this too fast and then realize that whoops, a couple of years later, now we're having to change basically all of the equipment because basically the batteries are deemed to be obsolete. So the embodied carbon is a consideration, but I would say that the maturity of the industry is probably a bigger factor right now.
Okay, well, we'll see when all that comes about, what discussions we have then. The other thing I would say is in this report, again, it says, $33,000 have been spent so far is what the report indicates. But I would say that figure doesn't consider staff costs and times because you're doing this now instead of doing something else, right? So you don't ever consider costs of like staff time when you put that dollar figure together in the report.
Staff cost to actually do the pilot or to prepare the pilot, that isn't in the cost considerations, no.
Okay, you're not alone in that, I don't think. I don't think we see that anywhere. The only other thing I would ask is in terms of a councillor motion, and I'm not against us looking at this, I'm just saying, don't councillor motions die at the end of a term of council?
So the councillor motion was carried by city council afterwards, and staff had direction to continue with that. Anything can be reconsidered by a future council, but of course, it doesn't just die, or else we wouldn't have any programs continuing council to council. It would have to be come back as part of a new council to consider a different direction. And my understanding is it wouldn't be reconsideration in that new term of council, as I understand. Maybe the clerk's office wants to opine, but I think that's how it works.
Mr. Chair, you're correct.
Linda's saying you're correct. The only reason I'm asking that is I'm wondering if there could be some more parts to it. But anyway, we can talk about that at some other time. Thank you.
Happy to have those discussions. I think we have Councillor Luloff, and that's it for the speakers list.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Can I just request that staff, when they're doing that sort of life cycle analysis, if they could also look at not just the end of life, but also the beginning of life. So the amount of pollution emissions with the mining of lithium, of the work that's done to refine aluminum, which is part of the pack component, nickel, manganese, cobalt as well. I think that I'd like to see sort of like an entire pollution life cycle cost up against using traditional combustion engines, so a comparison of the two. I think that would help us to show people that using these sort of battery packs will actually reduce pollution if that's the case. So essentially taking the life cycle of, say, like a whippersnipper that uses a gas-powered whippersnipper, the amount of gas and the amount of emissions over the course of its lifetime, and also the amount of batteries that it takes to run the same product over the course of its lifetime and its useful lifetime, including the emissions and pollution that's created through the open pit mining process as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor. I do want to just mention, I think all this discussion about embodied carbon, there's a lot of materials and buildings and roads and all kinds of things that has a lot of embodied carbon in it. And I welcome the discussion about including more embodied carbon in our decision-making in the future and what buildings we tear down, what we don't. Anyway, so I appreciate what you're saying, and you want to see the bare figures and the numbers. And I've heard a lot about the finances too, which, I think it's the same as the e-buses, right? You might save on the operations side, but some of that capital cost acquiring them and what embodied carbon comes with it is another a discussion point. So really appreciate the discussion of committee today on this. This is that climate change committee recommend that council receive this report for information. So is the recommendation and report received? Perfect. Thank you very much. So on the next item, 5.1, Environment and Climate Change Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending the 9th of May, 2024. There are no registered speakers for this item, and we have received no correspondence. Can we receive this item? Thank you. Any notices of motion from members for next committee meeting? Okay, not seeing any now. And I believe we do have one inquiry. Councillor Hill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Despite being a major global exporter of fertilizer, Canada still relies on nitrogenous fertilizer imports to keep up with our agricultural outputs. Imports of this nature add additional cost to farmers with international transportation and tariffs. Converting construction waste to synthetic fertilizer is a less expensive and more environmentally friendly way to provide our agriculture community with needed resources. Ottawa is home to facilities that can convert 80% of most construction and demolition waste into recycled biomass fertilizer. Increasing the viability of such facilities will also reduce the tonnage waste being sent to the Trail West landfill by providing alternate streams for construction and demolition waste. What support can the City of Ottawa provide to industry in order to reduce regulatory and legislative roadblocks to converting construction and demolition waste to synthetic fertilizers?
All right, thank you for that inquiry, Councillor Hill. Any other business from members? All right, so we're adjourned, and the next meeting of our Environment and Climate Change Committee will be on Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. Thanks, everybody.